Hey guys, tonight we do something a little different. We're going to travel back in time, not to witness a grand battle or a royal coronation, but to experience one of the most universal and dreaded human afflictions imaginable, a toothache. Before you laugh, remember that in the world we're about to enter, a simple cavity isn't an inconvenience you schedule a dentist for, it's a potential death sentence. Honestly, you'd probably have better odds surviving a battlefield than the infection that could follow a bad tooth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly makes these late night journeys possible. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all listening from tonight. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's always a quiet thrill for me to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts quietly, so quietly, in fact, you almost miss it. The day is ending. The sun has bled out below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple and orient. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth and wood smoke, is finally cooling. You're sitting on a rough-hewn stool outside your small, porcelain-daub home, scraping mud from your boots. It was a long day of work in the fields or at the loom, or by the shore. Your back aches, your hands are calloused, but it's the familiar ache of labor. It's a good ache. Then, you feel it. It isn't pain, not yet. It's just a presence, a low, dull throb from the back of your jaw, deep inside a molar you've never paid much attention to. It's like a single, distant drumbeat in an otherwise silent forest. Thump. You stop scraping. You tilt your head, listening, as if the sensation were a sound. Thump. You swallow. Run your tongue over the tooth. It feels solid. No, there's nothing there. You take a sip of cool water from a clay cup. The cold offers a brief, clean shock. And for a moment, the throb vanishes. You exhale. Relief. It was nothing, just your body settling after a day's toil. But as the evening deepens and the first stars prick the darkness, it comes back. Thump, thump. A little more insistent this time, a little less easy to ignore. This is a time when you are intimately connected to the rhythms of your own body. But it's a body you don't truly understand. It's a vessel of humors and spirits, a mysterious container governed by the moon, the seasons, and the will of forces you cannot see. Sickness isn't a matter of germs or cells, it's a sign of imbalance. Is your blood too hot? Is your phlegm too cold and damped? Did you offend a local spirit or draw the ire of a neighbor with an evil eye? This pain feels different. It's not the honest ache of a strained muscle. This feels internal, secretive. You press your thumb against your cheek, right over the spot. The pressure offers a strange kind of comfort, but the throb underneath continues its steady, stubborn rhythm. You've seen this before. You saw it in your neighbor last spring, the way he started holding his jaw, the way his eye began to water. Then came the swelling, the fever, the soft moans that slipped through his lips when he thought no one could hear. You tried to push the memory away. In your world, teeth aren't just bone. Some ancient philosophies, the ones whispered down through generations, believe they are seeds planted in your jaw before birth, each with its own life force. They are separate entities you just happen to host, so when one begins to ache, it feels like a tiny, malevolent being has awakened inside you. A small betrayal. Historians still debate the precise relationship pre-modern people had with their own bodies. Were they simply superstitious, attributing every ache to a demon or a curse, or did they operate within a complex, deeply felt system of folk medicine and self-care that, while not scientific, was their only tool for navigating the constant presence of pain and mortality? For you, right now, this isn't an academic question. It's a growing dread. The throb is no longer a distant drum. It's a persistent knocking on a door deep inside your head. You stand up and walk back into your home, the single room lit by the flickering, greasy light of a tallow candle. The familiar shadows on the wall seem longer tonight, more menacing. You lie down on your straw-stuffed mattress, hoping sleep will chase the feeling away. But the quiet of the night only amplifies it. The throb is becoming a rhythm, a pulse that matches your own heartbeat. A tiny, insistent voice whispering that something is wrong. You close your eyes, but you know, with a cold certainty that settles deep in your gut, this is only the beginning. You wake with the sun, or rather, just before it. It's not the rooster or the light that rouses you, but the throb. It's no longer a gentle knock, it's a sullen, persistent house guest who has spent the night getting comfortable in your jaw. The ache has put down roots. It radiates a dull, warm heat that you can feel in your cheek, your ear, and even down into your neck. Sleep did not banish it. If anything, the stillness of the night gave it space to grow. You swing your legs off your straw mattress and the simple act of sitting up sends a sharp, angry spike of pain from the tooth. You wince, a sharp intake of breath through your nose. You have to eat. The day's work won't do itself. In the center of the room, the embers from last night's fire are still glowing. You add a few sticks, blow on them gently, and soon a small flame licks the wood. You break off a piece of hard, coarse bread from yesterday's bake and dip it in a little water to soften it. You chew carefully, using only the good side of your mouth, your head tilted at an awkward angle. And as you chew, a memory surfaces. A few weeks ago, at the Midsummer Fair, it was a rare day of celebration. There was music, dancing, and a traveling merchant with a stall of wonders. He had things you'd only heard of in stories. Spices from lands so far away you couldn't imagine them. And he had sugar, not the dark, sticky treacle you sometimes get, but a cone of pure, white sugar, a sugar loaf, hard as a rock. For a small coin, his wife would use a special tool called sugar nibs to break off a tiny, glittering lump for you. You let it dissolve on your tongue. The taste was heavenly, an explosion of pure, clean sweetness that made your whole body sigh. It was a taste of another world, the world of lords and ladies. You also remember the honey cakes, sticky and dense, sold by a local woman. A rare treat you shared with your family, licking the sweetness from your fingers. What you don't know, what you can't possibly know, is that this pleasure is a new danger for most of human history. That kind of intense sweetness was a fleeting, seasonal gift from a honeycomb or a ripe piece of fruit. But now, in your lifetime, things are changing. Sugar, once a medicine and a spice more valuable than pepper, is starting a slow, relentless march into the lives of ordinary people. It was once called white gold, locked away in royal treasuries. Kings used it to sculpt elaborate centerpieces for their banquets, showing off a wealth so vast they could literally eat it. But far across the oceans, vast fields of sugarcane are being planted on islands you've never heard of. The process that brings this sweetness to you is brutal and vast. The global engine of labor and trade that you are a tiny, unknowing part of. And because of it, the price is slowly dropping. It's still a luxury, but it's an attainable one. A lump from a sugar loaf at a fair, a drizzle of molasses on your porridge for a special occasion. You might even be given a bit of sugar mixed with herbs by a healer for a sore throat. A sweet cure that, ironically, feeds the very thing that will cause you so much pain later. Historians are still actively debating how quickly this dietary shift occurred and when the general population began to connect this new, wonderful substance with the rotting teeth in their own mouths. Was there a folk wisdom that grew over time? A grandmother warning her child that too much sweet stuff makes the teeth ache, or was the pleasure so overwhelming, and the mechanism of decay so invisible, that the connection simply wasn't made? There is no single document, no aha moment. It was a slow, creeping plague of sweetness, its consequences emerging decades behind its arrival. For you, this is all irrelevant. You finish your crust of bread, the throb in your jaw a constant, miserable companion. You don't think about global trade routes or the economics of sugarcane. You think of the taste of honey cake and the glittering shard of sugar at the fair. But you don't connect that moment of pure joy with the misery you feel now. The two things exist in separate universes. The pain doesn't feel like the result of something you ate. It feels like an invasion, an attack. If the sweetness isn't the culprit, then something else must be. Something that crawled its way inside you when you weren't paying attention. The idea begins to take shape in your mind, fed by folklore and the shared anxieties of your village. The pain needs a name. It needs a face. The day is a blur of misery. Every footstep on the hard-packed earth sends a jolt up into your jaw. The rhythmic work that usually soothes your mind, the pull of the thread, the swing of the hammer. The slice of the scythe is a torture. Each movement, a fresh insult to the angry nerve in your tooth. The sun feels too bright. The sounds of the village too loud. You try to work. You have to. But your focus is a tiny, flickering candle flame. And the pain is a constant wind threatening to extinguish it. You find yourself holding your cheek, pressing hard on the bone, as if you could physically contain the ache and stop it from spreading. By midday, the pain has sharpened. It's no longer a dull, constant throb. Now, it comes in waves, each one cresting higher than the last. One moment it's a bearable background misery. The next it's a white-hot poker being twisted into your skull. You can't eat the midday meal of stewed lentils and greens. The warmth of the food alone is agonizing. You just sip some water, trying to keep it on the good side of your mouth. But even a stray drop hitting the wrong tooth makes you gasp. Your family watches you, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of pity and dread. Your partner offers you a cloth soaked in cool water, which you press gratefully to your swollen cheek. Your child looks at you with wide, worried eyes. They've seen this before. Everyone has. It's a rite of passage, as common as a winter cough or a summer fever. Finally, as dusk begins to settle again, you can't bear it any longer. The pain has become your entire world. There is no past, no future, only the searing, relentless present in your jaw. With a resigned sigh, your partner says the words you've been dreading. You should go see Alara. Alara is the village's wise woman. She's not a witch. Not in the way the priests rail against. She's a healer, a midwife, a keeper of the old knowledge. She lives on the edge of the village, in a cottage surrounded by a sprawling, chaotic garden of herbs. Her knowledge was passed down from her mother, who learned it from her mother before her. It's a knowledge woven from observation, tradition, and a heavy dose of what you would call superstition. You knock on her heavy oak door, your knuckles trembling slightly. She opens it and ushers you in without a word. She saw you coming. The cottage is dark and smells intensely of dried plants, with smoke and something else, something sharp and medicinal. Bunches of herbs hang from the rafters like sleeping bats. Jars of murky liquids and dried powders line the shelves. She gestures for you to sit, her eyes, clear and surprisingly sharp in her wrinkled face, already fixed on your swollen jaw. The tooth, she says. It's a statement, not a question. You nod, unable to speak. Let me see. You lean forward into the candlelight and reluctantly open your mouth. Her gnarled finger, surprisingly gentle, prods at your gums. You flinch when she touches the area around the angry molar. She squints, peering into the darkness of your mouth. Oh, she says, a low, knowing sound. She leans back. It's as I thought. You had a worm. The word hangs in the smoky air. A worm, Ata's worm. You've heard the stories your whole life, whispered around the fire on long winter nights. A tiny, insidious creature. A demonic parasite sent by evil spirits or born from foul humors in the body. They say it gnaws at the root of the tooth, drinking the blood and marrow, causing the terrible, deep-seated ache. This isn't a diagnosis to you, it's a confirmation of your deepest fears. The pain isn't just pain, it's the writhing of a living thing inside you. This is a nearly universal folk belief. and historians are fascinated by its persistence across so many cultures that had no contact with one another. Why a worm? Some scholars argue it's because the pain feels like a living thing, gnawing and burrowing. Others suggest it might have come from observing tiny, worm-like structures indicate teeth, which we now know are exposed nerve pulp, and misinterpreting them. There is also the theory that it stemmed from a real parasite, the guinea worm, which can emerge from the human body, leading people to believe other worms could live elsewhere. The exact origin of the tooth worm myth is one of those historical mysteries that may never be fully solved. Elara nods grimly. It's a stubborn one. I can see the burrow hole it's made. She's pointing at the dark spot on your tooth, the cavity you can't see. To her, it's not decay, it's an entrance. It chews and chews, and if we don't drive it out, it will poison the jaw and then the blood. I've seen it happen. You look at her, your eyes wide with terror. The pain suddenly makes a terrifying kind of sense. It has a name, it has a form. And now, you have an enemy to fight, and Nara turns to her shelves, her fingers dancing over the dusty jars. She's selecting her weapons for the coming battle. Your relief at finally having a diagnosis is immediately replaced by a new, chilling fear. What, exactly, must be done to kill a worm that is living inside your own bone? Elara's words echo in the small, herb-scented room. A worm. The diagnosis, as terrifying as it is, feels definitive. It gives your formless agony a shape. You're not just sick, you're infested. Before Elara begins her work, let's take a step back. So back, to understand where this idea even came from. We need to leave your small village, leave this entire era, and travel thousands of years into the past, to a land nestled between two rivers. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Picture a city of sun-baked mud brick under a relentless, hazy sun. This is Sumer, around 5000 BCE. The air is dry and dusty. The sounds are of bleating sheep, the murmur of a strange, guttural language, and the scratching of a stylus on wet clay. Here, among the world's first cities, first laws, and first written stories, we find the first recorded mention of the tooth worm. You are now a scribe, perhaps, or a priest healer. Your patient is a wealthy merchant, his face contorted in the same agony you just felt. He can't eat, he can't sleep. He offers you silver, grain, anything, to make the pain stop. You can't just give him a pain-relieving poultice, you must understand the divine reason for his suffering. In Sumerian cosmology, the universe is teeming with gods and demons. Every ailment, from a fever to a failed crop, is the work of a supernatural force. So you consult the texts. You take a small, dumb tablet of clay, about the size of your hand. You pick up your stylus, a sharpened reed, and you look at an older, master tablet that you have copied many times. It contains the incantation against the tooth worm. It's one of the most famous cuneiform texts ever discovered. The text archaeologists now call the legend of the worm. It's not just a medical recipe, it's a story, a creation myth for the worm itself. The text begins after the god Anu had created the heavens, and the heavens had created the earth, and the earth had created the rivers. The story unfolds as a dialogue. A worm appears before the sun god, Chamos, and the god of wisdom, Aya. The worm is weeping. What will you give me for my food, it asks. What will you give me for my sucking? The gods offer the worm the riches of the world, dried figs, apricots, the finest fruits. But the worm refuses. It is a creature of darkness and decay. It wants only one thing. Let me drink the blood of the teeth, it cries, and let me gnaw on the gums. Set me among the teeth and the jaws. It's a chilling request. This creature is born with a single, malevolent purpose. The gods are horrified, and the text concludes with the god Ea laying out the prescribed punishment for this arrogant creature. Since you have said this, O worm, he declares, may my mighty hand strike you. The incantation that follows is a magical formula for the healer to recite, calling upon the power of Ea to crush the worm. The treatment itself was a mixture of crushed herbs and beer, which was to be placed on the aching tooth while the priest recited the epic poem. This is a profound moment in medical history. Right here, on this clay tablet, the tooth worm is given its official narrative. It's not just a random folk belief, it's codified, written into the mythology of a great civilization. It provides an explanation, a villain, and a divinely sanctioned cure. And because the Sumerians were such influential traders and writers, their ideas about gods, numbers, and medicine spread. This little story, this myth of a self-aware, malevolent worm with a taste for human teeth, would become one of the most successful and enduring medical theories of all time. It's a testament to the power of a good story. What historians find so fascinating is how the myth frames the problem. The pain isn't a sign of your body failing, it's a sign that your body has been invaded by a demonic entity with its own will and desires. This externalizes the problem. It's not your fault. It's the worm's fault. This psychological framing is incredibly important. It gives the patient a clear enemy to fight, and the healer a clear mission to exorcise the intruder. It's a battle of good versus evil, played out on the tiny stage of a single mirror. There's still debate among Assyriologists about the exact nature of these texts. Were they seen as literal, historical accounts, or were they understood as a kind of powerful metaphor? A poetic way to frame the ritual of healing. We can't know for sure how a Sumerian patient truly perceived the worm. But what we do know is that the idea was powerful. It was so powerful, in fact, that it would outlive the Sumerian civilization itself. It would be copied by the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. It would be translated, adapted, and woven into the medical traditions of cultures thousands of miles and thousands of years away. Back in Nonora's hut, she has no idea she is the intellectual heir to a long-dead Sumerian priest. The story has been passed down, morphing and changing with each generation, but the core idea remains the same. There is a worm. It is the source of your pain, and it must be destroyed. As Elora rummages through her supplies, you sit in the flickering candlelight. The idea of the tooth worm consuming your thoughts. It feels ancient and true. And in a way, you're right. This isn't just some local superstition, quirk of your little village. What you're experiencing is a truly global phenomenon. The story of the worm, born in the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, went on a world tour. And it was a tour that would last for millennia. Let's leave Elora's hut for a moment and take a quick flight around the ancient world. First, let's travel south, to the land of the pharaohs. Here, in ancient Egypt, life and death are governed by a complex pantheon of gods and a profound understanding of medicine. For their time, you are now an Egyptian physician, highly respected, reading from a papyrus scroll. You have access to texts like the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most important medical documents in the world. And right there, among cures for heart ailments and digestive troubles, are remedies for a familiar problem. The text describes a throbbing in the tooth and attributes it to a gnawing worm. The prescribed cure: paste of incense, onion, and dough, to be placed on the tooth, followed by an incantation. Of course, the worm myth has found a comfortable home along the Nile. Now, let's travel east, across the vast deserts and mountains, to the Indus Valley. In ancient India, the foundational texts of Ayurvedic medicine are being written in the Toothache Ruta Samhita, a brilliant surgical text from around 600 BC. The author Toothache Ruta describes 76 different diseases of the mouth, and for that deep, throbbing pain in the teeth, he, too, points to the krimi, the Sanskrit word for worm. His approach, however, was a bit more proactive. He didn't just rely on spells. He described a method of fumigation, a technique we will come back to in much more detail later, to drive the worm out. Let's keep going east, to the burgeoning empire of China. Here, traditional medicine is built on the concept of qi, the vital life force, and the balance of yin and yang. Yet, even in this entirely different philosophical framework, the worm finds a way in. Ancient Chinese medical texts describe a small white worm with a black head that lives in the teeth, causing decay and pain. Their remedies involved a complex mixture of herbs, including arsenic, which was used to kill the worm. They even developed a technique using acupuncture needles to relieve the pressure and pain. It's a fascinating blend of mystical belief and practical, albeit dangerous, intervention. The worm's journey doesn't stop there. We find it in ancient Greece. Homer, in his epic poems, describes pain as annoying torment, language that evokes the worm even if he doesn't name it. Later Roman writers, like Pliny the Elder, would document the belief explicitly, listing dozens of folk remedies to expel or kill it. He mentions everything from rinsing your mouth with the ashes of a burnt dog's head to fumigating with the seeds of henbane. How did this happen? How did a single, strange idea achieve such global consensus in a world without internet? Without even reliable roads connecting these civilizations, historians are still piecing this puzzle together. The spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt and the Levant is easy to explain through trade and conquest, but its appearance in India and China is more mysterious. Was it transmitted slowly along the Silk Road, passed from merchant to merchant, a piece of cultural baggage alongside spices and silk, or is this a case of polygenesis, the idea that different cultures, faced with the same inexplicable problem of throbbing, hidden pain and the eventual appearance of a whole, independently came to the same logical, if incorrect, conclusion? Scholars continue to argue over which theory holds more water for different regions. It might be a mixture of both. What is certain is that the toothworm was the perfect explanation for the pain. It was simple, intuitive, and universally terrifying. It didn't require an understanding of microbiology or biochemistry. It just required an imagination and a deep-seated human fear of parasites. It explained why the pain was so deep and internal, why it felt like it was moving, and why the tooth itself seemed to be eaten away from the inside. This is the legacy that has landed in Alora's cottage. She is practicing a form of medicine that has been endorsed, in one form or another, by some of the greatest civilizations in history. She doesn't know it, but her diagnosis connects you to Egyptian priests, Indian surgeons, and Chinese occultists. You are all part of the same ancient, terrified club, the victims of the toothworm. Back in the hut, Elora turns from her shelves. She holds a small, grimy stone bowl. In it is a dark, lumpy paste. This will quiet the worm for a time, she says, her voice slow and serious. It is a strong recipe. Pulse down. You look into the bowl, and your stomach turns. The smell hits you first, a foul, earthy stench of decay and bitterness. You lean closer, and in the dim light, you can just make out the ingredients. Your heart sinks. This is not going to be pleasant. Elora holds the stone bowl out to you. This must be applied directly to the tooth, she instructs, her tone leaving no room for argument. It will make the worm sleepy and stop its gnawing. You peer into the bowl again, and this time you can see what the paste is made of. Your mind reels. There are crushed green herbs. Yes, but mixed in is a sticky, dark substance that looks like animal fat, and within it, you can see bits, tiny fragments of bone and what looks suspiciously like fur. But what is it, you manage to ask, your voice barely a whisper. Elora looks at you, her expression one of ancient patience, as if explaining something obvious to a small child. The base is goose fat. The herbs are nightshade and crowfoot to bring the poison, but the strength comes from the mouse. She says it so matter-of-factly. A field mouse, baked and ground to a powder. The worm fears the mouse. Everyone knows this. You stare at her, horrified. A dead mouse, ground up. And you're supposed to put this in your mouth. Your entire being screams in protest. But the pain in your jaw, which has been quiet for a moment, chooses this exact instant to send a searing, white-hot spike through your skull. You cry out, clutching your face. The agony is so immense, so overwhelming, that your disgust is suddenly, shockingly, secondary. You would do anything to make it stop, even this. With a trembling hand, you reach for the bowl. Alara dips a small wooden stick into the concoction and hands it to you. The stench is vile. You close your eyes, take a shallow breath through your nose, and quickly press the disgusting poultice against the aching molar. The taste is indescribable, rancid, bitter, earthy foulness that coats your tongue and makes you want to gag. You fight the urge to spit it out, focusing all your willpower on holding it in place. You sit there, rigid with misery. A dead mouse paste slowly dissolving in your mouth, praying for a miracle. This type of remedy, known as sympathetic magic, was a cornerstone of pre-modern medicine. The logic, while bizarre to us, was internally consistent. It operated on the principle of like cures like, or using an object that has a symbolic connection to the ailment. In this case, the mouse, a creature that gnaws and burrows, was believed to be a natural enemy of the worm, which does the same. Other variations of this remedy, found in old European medical texts, called for even more gruesome ingredients. Some recipes specified using the brains of a hare, mixed with wine. Others suggested a plaster made from burnt earthworms. One of the most famous, documented by the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, involved capturing a frog by moonlight, spitting into its mouth, and asking it to take the toothache away with it. It sounds insane, but this was a world trying to find order in chaos, and one of the weirdest and most fascinating subgenres of this was filth therapy, or the use of disgusting substances like dung and grime in medicine. Medical historians have long been both horrified and fascinated by this, while some of it was pure magical thinking. There's a fringe theory, and this is definitely a point of academic debate, that some of these remedies might have accidentally worked, but not for the reason they thought. For example, some types of animal dung contain fungi that produce natural antibiotics. It's a long shot, but it's possible that in a 1 in a million case, a disgusting poultice might have actually fought an infection. More likely, however, it just introduced a host of new and even more dangerous bacteria into an already vulnerable area. You sit in Alara's hut for what feels like an eternity, the foul paste clutched against your tooth. And then, something strange happens. The sharp, searing edge of the pain begins to dull. The relentless, high-pitched scream in your nerves softens to a low hum. It's not gone. Not by a long shot. But it's better. It's bearable. Is it the mouse? Is it spirit fighting the worm in the darkness of your jaw? Or is it the nightshade, a plant you know is poisonous, numbing the area? The placebo effect is a powerful thing, a testament to the mind's ability to influence the body. Your desperate belief that this will work is, perhaps, the most potent ingredient in the bowl. You look at Alara with wide, grateful eyes. She just nods slowly, as if this was the only possible outcome. The worm is sleeping now, she says, but it will wake up. They always do. This is only the first step. To truly drive it out, we will need more than just herbs and mice. We will need magic. She tells you to go home, to rest while the worm is quiet, and to return at the next nightfall. You leave her cottage, the disgusting taste still coating your mouth, but with a flicker of hope. The relief, however temporary, is intoxicating. As you walk back through the dark village, you can't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for the wise woman and her disgusting, miraculous cure. You have no idea that the next step of the treatment will be even stranger. The relief from Alara's mouse paste lasts through the night and into the next morning. It's a fragile peace, a temporary truce in your war with the worm. The pain is still there. Hello, that ground hum of the vicious, sharp attacks have ceased. You are functional again. You can work. You can speak without wincing at every word. But you can feel it. The dormant beast, waiting to reawaken. The fear is a constant companion. You follow Alara's instructions and return to her cottage as the sun sets, casting long, skeletal shadows across the village. The moon is rising, a perfect, luminous circle in the inky sky. Alara is waiting for you. Tonight, the air in her hut is different. It's not just medicinal, it's ceremonial. She has lit more candles, and a small brazier of coals glows in the center of the room, emitting a thin, aromatic stream of smoke. The worm is quiet, but it is not gone, she says, her voice a low chant. Herbs can only lull it. Words have the power to command it. She believes, as did many ancient healers, that the physical and the metaphysical are inextricably linked. A disease needs both a physical remedy and a spiritual one. You can't just treat the body, you have to treat the soul and bargain with the forces that govern it. She hands you a small, smooth river stone. Cool to the touch. Hold this in your left hand. The left hand is closer to the heart. She then begins the ritual. She instructs you to stand by the open door, facing the full moon. The moon governs the body's humus, the tides of the blood. She explains, we must appeal to her. Then, she begins to chant. The words are old, so old you don't recognize all of them. It's a jumble of your own language, mixed with Latin phrases left over from the Roman occupation centuries ago, and perhaps even older, pre-Roman syllables that have lost their meaning but retained their power. It's a spell, an incantation passed down through her lineage, a direct appeal to the celestial bodies and the hidden spirits of the world. Payargiadam, Margidam, Est Urgidam, she intones, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. Luna, Motorumaris, Tiore Hivorami Emax Dentoi, Mu, mother of moisture, pull the worm from this tooth. She circles you 3 times, sprinkling a little dried powder you think it might be crushed bone, or maybe chalk at your feet. She tells you to repeat a phrase after her. Out, worm, out. God's light is bright. Flee from the tooth into the night. You feel foolish, whispering these words into the darkness, but you are also desperate. You do it. You repeat the silly, frightening rhyme, your voice trembling. This practice is as old as the tooth worm myth itself. We saw it on the Sumerian clay tablet, where the healing was incomplete without the priest reciting the epic story. In ancient Greece, magical amulets were inscribed with spells to be worn around the neck. A well-documented medieval charm from Germany instructs the sufferer to chant, Pear tree, I complain to you. 3 worms sit in my tooth, and then to tie a knot in a branch of the tree, symbolically trapping the worms there. The variations are endless, but the principle is the same. The disease is a sentient entity, and it can be intimidated, commanded, or tricked into leaving. A particularly strange and widespread belief, a cold bit of trivia for your pained mind, was that you should never, ever talk about your toothache after sunset. It was believed that speaking of the worm at night would awaken it and make it more active. Some folklore even claimed that an evil spirit, overhearing your complaint, would send more worms to join the first one. This is why people would often suffer in silence until morning, or only seek help under the light of the sun. Historians and anthropologists are fascinated by the structure of these magical cures. They often involve specific numbers. 3, 7, and 9 are the most common. Specific times of day: dawn, dusk, full moon. Unspecific, often bizarre, physical actions. Why the scholarly debate continues. But one compelling theory is that the complexity and specificity of the ritual itself is part of the cure. It creates a powerful psychological effect. It's not just a simple prayer, it's a carefully orchestrated performance. This performance gives the patient a sense of control. You aren't just passively suffering, you are actively participating in your own healing. You are fighting back with the most powerful weapons you have: words, symbols, and faith. As Alara's chant reaches its crescendo, she takes a small knife and makes a tiny, symbolic cut on a piece of wood, declaring, as this wood is cut, so is the worm's life cut. She then throws the wood into the glowing brazier, where it crackles and bursts into flame. It is done, she says, her voice returning to normal. The spell is cast. The worm has been commanded to leave. Go home. Do not speak up again until the sun has risen. You leave her cottage, your mind reeling. The air outside feels charged, alive. The moon seems to watch you, a huge, silver eye in the sky. Does your tooth feel better? You're not sure, but you feel different. You feel as though you have faced your enemy, not with a foul-smelling paste, but with the power of the cosmos on your side. You walk home, the strange, ancient words still echoing in your head, hoping, praying, that they were enough. The spell seems to work. For 2 glorious days, you are almost pain-free. The gnawing has subsided into a memory. You start to believe that Alara's moon magic and her dead mouse poultice have truly banished the worm. But on the 3rd night, you are woken from a deep sleep by a familiar, horrific sensation. It's back, and it's angry. The pain is no longer a throb or a spike, it's a roaring, fiery inferno that engulfs the entire side of your face. You cry out, curling into a ball on your straw mattress, tears of agony and despair streaming down your cheeks. The herbs didn't work. The magic didn't work. The worm is relentless. By morning, your cheek is visibly swollen, hot and tender to the touch. You can barely open your mouth. Your family looks at you with profound pity. They know this stage of the illness all too well. This is when the worm, having resisted all other attempts at exorcism, must be dealt with by a higher power. Your partner, their face grim, whispers, "We must pray to Apollonia." In the Christian world, the old gods and spirits have been replaced by a new celestial called the saints, and for nearly every human affliction, there is a specific patron saint to appeal to. For lost items, you pray to Saint Anne. For me, for travelers, Saint Christopher, and for the excruciating torment of a toothache, there is Saint Apollonia. You make your way to the small stone church in the center of the village. Inside, it's cool and dark, smelling of old stone and incense. You find her image, either a small, painted wooden statue in a niche or a scene in a stained glass window, glowing with colored light. She is depicted as a beautiful young woman, but she is always holding a pair of pincers, and in the pincers, there is a tooth. As you kneel before her, you pray, but you also think of her story. A story every child in your village knows. Apollonia was a real person, a deaconess in Alexandria, Egypt. During a period of intense persecution of Christians in the 3rd century, according to the accounts, a pagan mob seized her. They were furious at her faith and her influence. First, they beat her, shattering her jaw and knocking out all of her teeth. The image is brutal or pious. Elderly woman being subjected to the very torture she would later become the patron of. But they weren't finished. They built a large bonfire on the edge of the city and threatened to throw her into it, unless she renounced her faith and repeated their pagan blasphemies. Apollonia, refusing to yield, asked for a moment of freedom. When they untied her, she did something shocking. Instead of running, she willingly leapt into the flames herself, choosing a martyr's death over betraying her God. It's a gruesome, powerful story, and it's why she became associated with teeth. The logic was simple because she had suffered so terribly with her teeth. She would have a special sympathy for those enduring the same pain. A prayer to her was a prayer to someone who truly understood. Her legend spread like wildfire throughout Europe. Churches were named after her. Guilds of dentists and barbers would later claim her as their patron, and her image was everywhere. Fascinating, and slightly morbid. Side note is the cottage industry that grew up around her relics. Her teeth, supposedly pulled during her torture, became highly sought after holy objects. The problem was, there were far too many of them. At one point, so many churches across Europe claimed to have one of Saint Apollonia's teeth that Pope Pius VI, in an attempt to curb the booming and obviously fraudulent relic trade, ordered them all to be collected and destroyed. It said that he filled a large chest with the sheer volume of teeth that were turned in. The historical debate around Apollonia is a gentle one, not of controversy but of detail. Historians generally agree that she was a real historical figure and a martyr, but the specifics of her torture, particularly the part about her teeth being pulled out with pliers, might be a later embellishment. The earliest accounts simply say she was beaten in the face, which broke her jaw. The more graphic detail of the tooth extraction might have been added to the story later to make the connection to toothaches more explicit and her patronage more powerful. Does it matter to you? Kneeling in the church? Absolutely not. The story is true in the way that matters most. It gives you hope. You pray with a fervor born of pure desperation. You ask Saint Apollonia to intercede on your behalf, to quiet the worm, to take away the pain. You promise to be more devout, to light a candle in her honor every week. You stay there for a long time, the cold stone floor pressing into your knees, your whispered prayers filling the silent church. Leaving the church, you feel a sense of calm, but the physical reality of the pain is unchanged. The swelling in your jaw is a hard, unyielding lump. You have now tried folk medicine, magic, and religion. You have appealed to the earth, the moon, and the heavens. But the worm, or what you believe to be the worm, is still there, burrowed deep inside you, asserting its victory with every pulse of agony. You are running out of options. There is one last resort in the village, a man you have been trying to avoid, a man whose profession is not healing, but cutting. The prayers to Saint Apollonia offer spiritual comfort, but now physical relief. The swelling in your jaw has grown larger, tighter. It's no longer just your cheek. The inflammation is spreading down your neck and up towards your eye. The pain has settled into a deep, permanent state of being. You can't eat. You can barely drink. A fever is starting to set in, making you shiver even in the warmth of your small home. You are reaching a dangerous point. The worm, as you call it, is threatening to poison your whole body. Your family gathers, their faces tight with worry. The discussion is grim and quiet. All other paths have been tried and have failed. There is only one person left to see. The very thought sends a jolt of pure terror through you. A fear so profound it momentarily eclipses the pain. You have to go to the barber. In your time, there is no such thing as a dentist. There is no doctor in the modern sense, either. Not for a common person like you. University-trained physicians exist, but they are incredibly rare and serve only the fabulously wealthy. They diagnose by examining urine and consulting astrological charts, and they wouldn't dream of getting their hands dirty. For the real, hands-on work of medicine, the lancing of boils, the setting of bones, the amputation of limbs, and the pulling of teeth, you go to the barber-surgeon. His shop is easy to find. You just look for the pole. The iconic red and white striped pole that still symbolizes barbershops today. You probably think you know what it means: red for blood, white for bandages. And you're right, but the original pole had a more specific, and frankly, more graphic meaning. It represented the staff that a patient would grip tightly to make their veins pop out for bloodletting. The barber would then wrap the clean, white bandage around the staff after the procedure, which would inevitably become soaked with blood, creating the spiraling red and white pattern. The brass ball on top that symbolized the basin used to catch the blood. His sign is literally an advertisement for the messiest part of his job. You push open the door to his shop. The smell is a strange mixture of hair, soap, and a faint, coppery scent you try not to identify. It's a social hub, a place for men to gather, get a shave, and exchange gossip. But in the corner, there is another side to the business. A sturdy wooden chair that looks more like a throne of judgment, and on a nearby table, an array of gleaming metal tools. They are not the delicate, precise instruments of a modern surgeon. They are heavy, brutal, and utilitarian, designed to leverage and force. The barber-surgeon himself is a stout man with a leather apron stained with well, you don't want to look too closely. His hands are strong, his forearms thick. These are the hands of a man who works with his body. He is not a scholar. He likely can't read. His knowledge comes from apprenticeship, from watching his master and learning the trade through repetition. He knows the basics of the human body not from books, but from practical, hands-on experience. He knows how to stop a bleed, how to stitch a wound, and most importantly for you, he knows how to get a troublesome tooth out of a head. He takes one look at your swollen face and nods grimly. The worm's dug in deep, he says, his voice rough. His diagnosis is the same as Olara's, but his solution is radically different. He has no time for spells or poultices. He is a man of action and steel. He gestures to the chair. Sit. The historical relationship between barbers and surgeons is a long and tangled one. For centuries, they were one and the same. The learned physicians looked down on surgery as a crude, manual craft beneath their station. This left a massive gap in healthcare that was filled by practical tradesmen. Barbers, who were already skilled with sharp razors, naturally expanded their services. This created a long-standing professional rivalry. The university-trained physicians in their robes and the barber-surgeons in their aprons were two separate classes of healers, often in conflict. There's a continuing debate among medical historians about the actual skill level of the average barber-surgeon. Were they all just brutish sore bones? As popular culture often portrays them, or were many of them highly skilled craftsmen who, despite a lack of formal education, developed a significant degree of practical anatomical knowledge? The answer is likely somewhere in the middle. Like any trade, there were masters, and there were hacks. As you sit in the chair, your heart hammering against your ribs, you just pray this man is a master. He doesn't offer you any anesthetic. There is none. No whiskey, no laudanum, nothing to dull the senses. You will be awake and aware for the entire procedure. His only concession to your comfort is to tell you to grip the arms of the chair tightly. He turns to his table of tools. Your eyes are drawn to them, a horrifying magnet for your gaze. You see pliers, levers, and elevators, and then you see the tool he is reaching for. It's a wicked-looking metal instrument, a curved, claw-like device that looks like it belongs in a blacksmith shop, not a place of healing. He sees you staring, a flicker of professional pride in his eyes. Time to introduce the worm to the pelican, he says. The pelican, he calls it. You stare at the object in his hand, and your blood runs cold. It doesn't look like a bird. It looks like a medieval torture device. It's a heavy, intimidating piece of iron. It consists of a long shaft and a curved, semicircular bolster that will be braced against your guns. Attached to the shaft is a swinging arm with a claw, a hook, at the end. The hook is what he will use to grab the tooth. The whole apparatus vaguely resembles the shape of a pelican's beak and pouch, hence the name. It's a name that is far too gentle for such a brutal-looking instrument. The barber-surgeon sees the terror in your eyes. It's the best tool for the job, he says gruffly. Gets the deep ones out. The ones with the crooked roots. HES not being cruel, HES just being practical. In his world, success is measured by one thing: getting the tooth out. The patient's comfort is a distant, secondary concern. He tells you to open your mouth. Your jaw is so stiff and swollen you can barely manage it. He forces it open wider with his thick fingers, his touch not unkind, but firm and unyielding. The pain is immense, but it's quickly being overshadowed by a rising tide of panic. He positions the pelican. The cold, hard metal of the bolster presses firmly against the outside of your gums. You can feel the pressure on the bone of your jaw. It's an alien, deeply unsettling sensation. Then, with surprising dexterity, he slips the claw over the top of the offending molar, working it down until a firm grip on the crown of the tooth. Don't move, he grunts. It's the most superfluous instruction you have ever heard. You are paralyzed, frozen in the chair, your knuckles white as you grip the armrests. The dental pelican was the state-of-the-art tooth-pulling tool for nearly 400 years, from the 14th century well into the 18th. It was invented by a man named Guy de Chauliac, one of the most eminent surgeons of the Middle Ages. His goal was to create a tool that used leverage to extract a tooth, rather than just pulling it straight up, which often failed if the tooth was firmly rooted. The pelican uses the gum and adjacent teeth as a fulcrum. By rotating the handle, the claw pulls the tooth sideways, breaking it free from the ligaments that hold it in the socket. It was, in theory, a mechanically elegant solution. In practice, it was often a disaster. If the barber-surgeon was not incredibly skilled, or if he applied too much force, the pelican could cause catastrophic damage. It could break the tooth, leaving the infected root behind. It could fracture the jawbone. Worst of all, the claw could slip off the target tooth and instead rip out one or two perfectly healthy neighboring teeth. Imagine enduring all that pain, only to have the wrong tooth pulled. It was a common and horrifying outcome. One of the more peculiar and lesser-known facts about these early dental tools is their cosmetic appearance. While the one in your barber's hand is probably plain iron, wealthier barber surgeons, especially those in major cities, often had incredibly ornate sets. Their pelicans and other tools would have handles carved from ivory, ebony, or mother's pearl, sometimes inlaid with silver or gold. It was a status symbol, a way to show off their success and skill. It's a strange thought the instrument of your agony could also be a beautiful work of art. The historical debate here centers on the transition from the pelican to the more modern-looking dental key, and eventually to forceps. Was the pelican really as bad as it sounds? Some historians, looking at the mechanics, argue that in the hands of a master, it was actually a very effective tool for specific types of extractions. They suggest that its reputation for brutality comes from its misuse by unskilled practitioners. Others maintain that it was fundamentally a flawed and dangerous design, and that any successful extraction was more a matter of luck than skill. The truth, as always, is probably a mix. Your barber surgeon has probably had great successes and horrifying failures with the very tool he now holds in your mouth. He takes a firm stance, planting his feet on the floor. He grips the handle of the pelican with both hands. A deep breath, he says. You can't. You just close your eyes and brace yourself. He begins to twist. The first sensation is an unbelievable pressure, a feeling that your entire skull is being compressed. Then comes a sickening, grinding crack. It's a sound you feel more than you hear. A wet, violent splintering of bone deep inside your head. It is the sound of your own body breaking. The pain is instantaneous and absolute. It is a universe of pure, white-hot agony. It's not the throb of the worm, it's a new, mechanical violence. He twists again. And you hear another crack. He pulls. You feel a hideous staring sensation as the roots, which have been fused to your jawbone for your entire life, are ripped from their home. A gush of raw, metallic-tasting blood fills your mouth. And then, it's over. He pulls the tool away. In its claw is a bloody, mangled thing with long, crooked roots. Your tooth. He holds it up for you to see. A trophy from his battle. There, he says, with a grunt of satisfaction. The worm's house is gone. You sit in the barber's chair, trembling and sick with sweat. The world comes back to you in waves of nausea and dizzying relief. Your mouth is a cavern of raw, throbbing pain, but it's a different kind of pain. It's the clean, aching pain of a wound, not the insidious, burrowing pain of the worm. The source of the torment is gone. The barber gives you a cup of water to rinse with, and you spit a horrifying stream of blood into a wooden bucket on the floor. He stuffs a wad of lint into the bleeding socket. Bite down on this, he instructs. The bleeding will stop. For Melly, this brutal extraction would be the end of the story. But let's rewind. Let's imagine you lived in a slightly different time or place. Or perhaps you consulted a different kind of healer before resorting to the barber surgeon. Let's say you sought out a specialist, a traveling tooth drawer who claimed he had a gentler, more magical way to solve your problem. A way to get the worm out without pulling the tooth. You find this man not in a shop, but in the chaotic, noisy swirl of a town marketplace. He has a small, colorful tent and a crowd of curious onlookers. He is a showman, but to Soma, he speaks of the toothed worm with dramatic flair, his voice booming over the market din. He doesn't offer to pull the tooth. Why destroy the house? He asks the crowd. When you can simply evict the unwanted tenant, his solution is ancient, celebrated, and, to the desperate, incredibly appealing. He offers fumigation. He sits you down on a stool in front of everyone. The public nature of the treatment is part of its power. It is a demonstration. He takes a small metal dish and places a few hot coals in it from a brazier. Then, he reaches into a leather pouch and pulls out a pinch of tiny, dark seeds. He tells you they are the magical seeds of the henbane plant. Henbane is a real plant, and it has a long and notorious history. A member of the nitrate family, it's highly toxic and contains powerful alkaloids that can cause hallucinations, delirium, and a state of semi-paralysis. It was a key ingredient in witches' flying ointments and has been used as both a poison and a medicine for centuries. Its use in dentistry was one of its most common applications. The tooth drawer sprinkles the henbane seeds onto the hot coals. They immediately begin to smolder, releasing a thick, acrid, oily smoke. It's a strange, unpleasant smell. He then takes a funnel, places the wide end over the smoking dish, and directs the narrow end into your open mouth. Breathe deeply, he commands. The worm hates the smoke. It will flee from the poison gas. You lean over the dish, the funnel in your mouth, and inhale. The smoke is harsh and makes your eyes water. You cough and choke. But the tooth drawer and the crowd encourage you. Birds it, choke the beast out. You take another, deeper breath of the noxious fumes. The world around you begins to feel a little strange. The sounds of the market seem to warp and bend. The faces in the crowd start to look distorted. Their grins too wide, their eyes too bright. The henbane is starting to work. Not on the worm, but on your brain. You're getting high. This practice of fumigation was incredibly widespread, recommended by serious physicians from ancient India to Renaissance Europe. The Roman physician Scribe Ius Argus, in the 1st century AD, gave a detailed description of the procedure, which was then copied and cited by medical writers for the next 1500 years. It was considered a legitimate, first-line treatment for a toothache caused by a worm. A weirdly specific, and rather unhygienic, folk variation of this treatment didn't use a funnel. The patient was instructed to hold a mouthful of warm beer over the aching tooth. The healer would then drop a hot nail or a heated plowshare into a bucket of water, and the patient had to lean over and inhale the steam. The logic was that the combination of the beer's virtue and the power of the iron steam would drop to the worm out. The academic controversy surrounding henbane fumigation is a fascinating one. For centuries, everyone, patients and healers alike, believed it worked. But why modern science tells us there is no worm? So what was going on? The primary debate is whether the practitioners of this cure were all cynical charlatans who knew it was a trick, or if they were true believers who were, in a sense, fooling themselves along with their patients. Many historians argue for the latter. The healer, having been taught this method by his master, genuinely believed in the worm and the power of the henbane. He saw the proof with his own eyes. Just as you are about to. You stay hunched over the smoking dish, inhaling the toxic fumes, feeling more and more disoriented. The tooth drawer tells you to lean forward and spit into a bowl of clean water he has placed at your feet. You do as you're told, spitting out a mouthful of saliva and smoke-tinged phlegm. The tooth drawer lets the water settle, then triumphantly holds the bowl up for you and the crowd to see. And there, floating in the water, are a dozen or so tiny, black, worm-like specks. Behold, he cries, the worms, we have smoked them out. The crowd gasps. You stare into the bowl, your drugged mind struggling to process what it's seeing. There they are, small, black, wriggling specks in the water. They look exactly like tiny worms. The tooth drawer swirls the bowl, and they dance in the water. The proof is undeniable, floating right in front of your eyes. A wave of profound, giddy relief washes over you, amplified by the hallucinogenic effects of the henbane's smoke. It worked. The pain in your tooth, which has been temporarily masked by the drug-induced euphoria and the sheer shock of the moment, seems to have vanished. You have just witnessed the climax of the oldest and most successful magic trick in medical history. The worms that you see in the bowl are not, of course, parasites from your tooth. They are the small, dark embryos from inside the henbane seeds themselves. When the seeds are heated on the coals, they crack open, and the tiny embryo inside is expelled along with the smoke. They are incredibly light and are carried up the funnel with the fumes, straight into your mouth when you spit into the bowl of water. You're just spitting out the seeds or innards. Their wriggling, lifelike movement in the water is simply the result of them uncoiling as they absorb the liquid. It's a brilliant, self-contained piece of stage magic. This single, powerful illusion is the reason the toothworm myth persisted for so long. It was empirical evidence. A patient came with a problem pain, underwent a treatment fumigation, and was presented with a tangible result: worms in a bowl. It's a perfect, closed loop of logic. It didn't matter what a skeptical philosopher might argue, the proof was right there. You saw it with your own eyes. The healer saw it. The whole village saw it. For a moment, let's consider the healer. Was he a cynical con man or a true believer? Many historians now lean towards a more charitable interpretation. Imagine the scene from his perspective. His master taught him this technique. He told him, heat the seeds of the henbane, and the worm will be driven out. So, he does it, and lo and behold, every single time, worms appear in the bowl. From his point of view, the experiment is repeatable and always yields the same result. Why would he question it? He is, in his own way, following a form of the scientific method based on observation and evidence. The fact that his central premise, the worm, and his interpretation of the evidence, the seed embryos, are completely wrong is almost beside the point. He believes he is healing people, and the people believe they are being healed. A particularly curious detail from some historical accounts of this procedure is the post-fumigation care. Some healers would advise the patient to avoid certain foods for a few days, like cheese or old meat. The given reason was that these foods could breed new worms. In reality, this was likely a clever bit of practical advice. A patient with a severe toothache probably had an exposed nerve, and soft, pungent foods could irritate it, causing the pain to return and making the cure look like a failure. By prescribing a bland diet, the healer inadvertently gave the tooth a chance to calm down, further solidifying the illusion of success. The academic debate about the henbane trick is a lively one. It touches on the history of science, the psychology of belief, and the ethics of medicine. Was this pious fraud daylight told for a good cause, or was it a shared delusion? A powerful cultural ritual where the belief of the participants was the most important ingredient. Scholars like to point out that even highly educated men, physicians and botanists who should have known better, continued to recommend this treatment well into the 17th and 18th centuries. The power of tradition, and the power of seeing it with your own eyes, was just that strong. Back in the marketplace, you are overjoyed. You pay the tooth drawer his fee, your hands still trembling slightly. The crowd applauds. Another soul saved from the torment of the worm. You walk away from the tent feeling light, not just from the relief, but from the henbane still circulating in your system. The pain is gone. The worm is gone. You are cured. The feeling of triumph lasts for about 6 hours, as the effects of the henbane wear off. And as you try to eat a simple piece of bread for your evening meal, a familiar, deep, and ominous throb begins to pulse from the depths of your worm-free tooth. The worm, it seems, had a family, and you just made them very, very angry. The magic trick has failed, and you are back where you started, but this time with a profound sense of betrayal and the lingering, unpleasant aftertaste of toxic smoke. The failure of the fumigation is a special kind of cruelty. It gave you a fleeting, powerful hook, only to snatch it away. The pain that returns is laced with despair. You feel foolish. You were part of a public spectacle, a testament to a cure that was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Now, as you sit in the growing darkness, nursing your jaw, you feel a cynical anger towards the traveling tooth drawer and his cheap tricks. Let's shift our perspective for a moment. Let's leave you in your misery and zoom in on another version of that same marketplace charlatan. This one is even more audacious. His methods more theatrical. HES not just promising to smoke the worm out, HES promising to pull it out, alive and wriggling. Picture him a man with a booming voice and a flair for the dramatic, standing on a small wooden stage. Beside him is a table laden with jars of strange liquids and gleaming, scary-looking tools. A large banner behind him, painted with a grotesque, snarling worm, advertises his services. He is the master of a technique that relies not on botany, but on pure, unadulterated sleight of hand. His patient, another poor soul just like you, sits in a chair on the stage. The man examines the tooth with a great show of scholarly concentration. But he declares to the crowd, a particularly stubborn breed of worm. It has burrowed deep, near the root. But fear not, for I have a secret oil that will anger it and force it to show its head. He takes a small vial of foul-smelling oil, probably just animal fat mixed with some pungent herbs, and applies it to the patient's tooth with a feather. He then takes a small, delicate-looking probe and inserts it into the cavity. He tells the patient to hold very still. The crowd leans in, holding its breath. What they don't see is what the charlatan is doing with his other hand, the one hidden from their view, concealed in his palm, or sometimes tucked under a fingernail. Is his secret weapon a tiny, wriggling maggot or a small piece of lute string that has been treated to curl when wet? These were the tricks of the trade, passed down among guilds of traveling mountebanks. He might have sought the maggots from a piece of old cheese or meat, keeping them in a small, concealed box. With the crowd's attention fixed on the patient's agonized face, the charlatan performs his move. As he pokes around in the mouth with his probe, he deftly, imperceptibly, transfers the maggot from his hidden hand to the tip of the instrument. It's a move worthy of a stage magician. He then withdraws the probe with a flourish, and there, on its very tip, is a living toothworm, writhing for all to see. Success, he roars. The crowd erupts in a mixture of horrified disgust and amazed applause. He triumphantly drops the maggot into a jar of alcohol to prove it has been dispatched, and the relieved patient, caught up in the drama and collective belief of the crowd, pays him handsomely. This kind of blatant fraud was rampant, especially from the Middle Ages through the 18th century. These performers were a common sight at fairs and markets, preying on the desperation of those in pain. They were part of a larger ecosystem of what were known as quacks, a term that likely comes from the Dutch word quacksalver, meaning someone who boasts about their solves. They were masters of marketing and psychology. A particularly fun and weird historical tidbit is how these charlatans would often work with accomplices. They might have a shill in the crowd, someone who would pretend to have a terrible toothache. The quack would perform his cure on the shill, who would then leap up, proclaiming himself miraculously healed and singing the praises of the tooth drawer. This theatrical testimonial would convince the real sufferers in the audience to open their wallets. It was a well-oiled, cynical machine. So, how do we know about these secret tricks? Historians have pieced it together from a few different sources. Firstly, there were the writings of the legitimate physicians and surgeons of the time. They were often in fierce competition with the quacks and would write scathing exposes, revealing their rivals' tricks to discredit them. They described the hidden maggots and the lute strings in great detail. Secondly, some of these mountebanks, upon retiring or perhaps having a crisis of conscience, would occasionally confess their methods. One famous 16th century account by a German surgeon named Johannes Seskoltet has carefully deconstructed the entire henbane and maggot frauds, explaining them as cheap tricks to fool the gullible. But the most compelling evidence is also the most debated. Some scholars argue that you can see these scenes playing out in the art of the period. There are numerous paintings and engravings from the 16th and 17th centuries depicting these marketplace tooth drawers. Artists like Jan Steen and Gerard van Honthorst painted these scenes with incredible detail. In some, you can see the shifty-eyed expression of the quack, the gullible faces in the crowd, and sometimes even a hint of the trickery itself. The debate is whether the artists were simply documenting a common theme, or if they were actively trying to satirize and expose the fraud. For you, sitting at home, this knowledge does little to soothe your aching jaw, but it does reframe your world. You now understand there are two kinds of healers: those who believe their own magic, like Anara, and those who knowingly sell lies for profit. Both have failed you. The pain is getting worse. The swelling is returning. You are beginning to realize that the only way to get rid of the worm might be to follow the barber's advice after all demolish its house. Your options have narrowed to a single, terrifying point: extraction, the folk remedies, the magic, the prayers, the theatrical frauds. They have all proven useless against the relentless siege in your jaw. The thought of the barber's pelican makes you physically ill, but the alternative, this escalating, feverish agony, seems even worse. As you contemplate this grim choice, it might be a small, strange comfort to know that even the most powerful people on earth shared your dread. Let's travel forward in time a bit, to the court of late 16th century England. The air is thick with intrigue, poetry, and the smell of unwashed bodies masked by perfume. Here, ruling over a nation rising in power, is Queen Elizabeth I. She is Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, a woman of formidable intelligence and legendary authority, dressed in magnificent gowns adorned with pearls and jewels. But beneath the powdered face and the elaborate red wig, she is a human being suffering from the same miserable ailment as you. For years, Queen Elizabeth was plagued by terrible toothaches and blackened, decaying teeth. Foreign ambassadors and English courtiers alike wrote about it in their private letters and diaries. The French ambassador, André de Massey, noted in 1597 that the Queen's teeth were very yellow and unequal. A German traveller, Paul Hens Senior, was a bit more blunt, writing that her teeth were black on the front, a defect he attributed to her great love of Zucchero sugar. Then too, the Queen had a notoriously sweet tooth. Sugar, still an immense luxury, was a symbol of wealth and power. It was served at her banquets in staggering quantities, not just in desserts, but in savory dishes as well. She loved candied fruits and elaborate sugar sculptures. Her court consumed it with abandon, and they paid the price. Elizabeth, like many of her wealthy nobles, suffered the dental consequences of this new, fashionable diet. For a long time, she endured the pain with stoic resolve, absolutely terrified of the cure. She had seen what tooth-pulling involved. She knew the brutality of the barber-surgeons and their iron tools. The thought of such a violent, intimate procedure was unbearable to her. She refused treatment, week after week, as the pain grew worse and her counselors watched with concern. Finally, her pain became so great, and the infection so worrying, that her counselors decided something must be done. The health of the monarch was a matter of state security. They begged her to allow a surgeon to pull the offending tooth. She refused, convinced the pain of the extraction would be worse than the disease, and thus it might even kill her. This is where the story takes a rather charming and clever turn. To persuade the fearful queen, one of her loyal bishops, the man named John Elmo, did something remarkable. He was an old man himself, and he also had very few teeth left. Seeing his sovereign's terror, he stepped forward and said, "In essence, to show you it is not so bad, and to prove the surgeon's skill, let him pull one of my teeth first." And he did, in front of the queen and the entire court. The brave old bishop had a surgeon extract one of his own remaining teeth, a perfectly healthy one, by some accounts to demonstrate that the procedure was survivable. This act of chivalrous, dental sacrifice worked. Shamed by his courage and reassured by his survival, the queen finally relented. She submitted to the surgeon, who successfully extracted her rotten tooth. This episode reveals so much about the era. It shows that the fear of dental treatment was universal, transcending class and power. The most powerful monarch in Europe was just as scared as you are. It also highlights a fascinating, a slightly grim aspect of courtly life, the performance of loyalty. Bishop Helmore's gesture was an extreme but effective piece of political theatre. Historians still debate the full extent of Elizabeth's dental problems and how they may have affected her speech and her health later in life. Some suggest that the loss of her front teeth is what led to her famously cautious and sometimes ambiguous speaking style. Others argue that chronic dental infections may have contributed to her declining health in her final years. It's difficult to prove definitively, but it's a compelling theory. What is not debated is her lifelong fear and her documented suffering. So as you sit there, treating your own appointment with the barber-surgeon, you can picture Queen Elizabeth I, surrounded by the splendor of her court, yet showering your exact same fear. Your pain connects you across the social chasm. It's a strange and powerful thought. If a queen, with all her power and wealth, had to endure this, then perhaps you can too. Her story doesn't make the prospect of the pelican any less terrifying, but it makes it feel historic. It frames your personal agony as part of a much larger, shared human experience of suffering. Armed with this bizarre royal solidarity, you take a deep breath, stand up, and begin the walk back to the barber's shop. Your decision to return to the barber-surgeon feels final, a surrender to the inevitable. In your corner of the world, it seems all roads, whether paved with herbs, spells, or royal anecdotes, led to his brutal chair. But what if you could take a detour? What if we could pause your story and journey to a different place? A place where the understanding of medicine, while still believing in the worm, was taking a dramatically different path. Let's travel south and east, away from the muddy lanes of medieval Europe, to the heart of the Islamic world during its golden age. Somewhere between the 8th and 13th centuries, we could be in Baghdad, the magnificent circular city, or in Cordoba, the glittering capital of Al-Andalus in Spain. The air here is not filled with the dread of superstition, but with the buzz of intellectual curiosity. Scholars are not burning books, they are translating them, collecting the wisdom of the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians, and building upon it. Here, medicine is a respected science. You are not visiting a barber in a bloody apron, but a hakim, a physician, in a clean, well-lit library, or a bimeristan, a true hospital, with separate wards for different diseases, a pharmacy, and a commitment to patient care that was centuries ahead of Europe. Your physician here would also, most likely, believe in the tooth worm. The idea, inherited from Greek texts which themselves were influenced by Mesopotamian lore, was deeply embedded in their medical tradition as well, but their approach to it was far more nuanced and systematic. An Islamic physician would not immediately reach for a magical charm or a horrifying tool. He would first take a detailed history. He would ask about your diet, your habits, your digestion. He would diagnose the type of tooth pain you were having. Great medical encyclopedias were written during this period, books that would become the standard medical textbooks in Europe for hundreds of years. One of the most famous was the Canon of Medicine, written by the Persian polymath Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. In his Canon, Avicenna discusses toothache at length. He identifies multiple causes, including heart or cold humors affecting the tooth. And yes, he talks about the worms that can be generated in the roots of the teeth. But his proposed treatments are a world away from dead mice and random spells. He suggests a careful, staged approach. First, try gentle remedies. He recommended mouthwashes made with pepper, ginger, or myrrh, not for magic, but because he observed their numbing or heating properties. He also developed sophisticated pain-relieving compounds. He was a master of pharmacology, and his texts are filled with recipes for early painkillers, often using opium or henbei, but used with a degree of care and dosage that was far more refined than simply throwing the seeds on hot coals. If these gentle methods failed, the next step was a procedure that might sound familiar: fumigation. But here again, the method was more clinical. Arabic texts describe specific fumigation mixtures and techniques designed to be more effective and perhaps slightly less hallucinogenic. Only after all other options were exhausted would an Islamic physician consider extraction. And even then, the approach was different. Surgeons like Abul-Qasis, a 10th century Andalusian physician often called the father of modern surgery, designed and illustrated hundreds of surgical instruments in his encyclopedia, El-Tosif. His section on dentistry is remarkable. He shows scrapers for cleaning teeth, files for smoothing rough edges, and multiple, specialized forceps for extraction. He advised against using the brutal pelican, favoring tools that allowed for a firmer grip and a more controlled pull. He also gave stern warnings a tooth should only be pulled after very careful examination, and the surgeon must be incredibly careful not to fracture the jaw or damage healthy teeth. He was advocating for a standard of care that was simply non-existent in most of Europe at the time. One of the most fascinating and little-known innovations from this period was in the field of prosthetics. Abul-Qasis and others described how to construct artificial teeth out of carved ox bone and how to wire them to the neighboring healthy teeth using gold or silver thread. This wasn't just cosmetic, it was functional. They understood that losing teeth could affect speech and eating. While a peasant like you would never have access to such a thing. It shows a level of thinking about dental health, not just dental pain, that was revolutionary. The academic debate here is not about whether the Islamic Golden Age was medically established. The debate is about the transmission of this knowledge. How much of it successfully made its way into Europe, and how much was lost in translation or ignored. We know that texts by Avicenna and Abul-Qasis were translated into Latin in Spain and Italy, and they were studied in the first European universities. But there was often a huge gap between the knowledge in the book and the practice of the man with the pliers in the village square. It's like a high-tech manual being delivered to a mechanic who only has a hammer. The knowledge was there, but the tools, training, and cultural mindset were often lagging far behind. So, for a moment, you can dream. You can imagine a world where your pain is met not with brute force, but with careful consideration. A world of clean hospitals, thoughtful physicians, and a commitment to easing suffering. It's a tantalizing glimpse of a different path, a more enlightened approach. But it is not your world. Your reality is the barber's chair. The dream fades, and the cold, hard reality of your own time and place settles back in. There is no Avicenna for you. There is only the man with the pelican. The decision is made. There are no more detours. No more dreams of enlightened physicians in faraway lands. There is only the short, dreadful walk back to the barber-surgeon's shop. As you trudge through the muddy lane, head down, every sight and sound seems to mock your pain. But this fear, this agony, you are not alone in it. Far from it. Your suffering is so common, so deeply embedded in the human experience of your time, that it has been immortalized. It hangs on the walls of churches and in the homes of the wealthy. It has been carved into wood and etched onto paper. Let's pause your walk for a moment and step into a different kind of gallery, the art of the toothache. If you want to truly understand the universal terror of dental pain before the modern era, you don't look in medical textbooks. You look at the paintings. From the late Middle Ages through the 18th century, a peculiar genre of art emerged, scenes of tooth pullers and their suffering patients. These weren't grand historical paintings or solemn religious icons. They were scenes of everyday life, raw and unflinching, and they are a powerful testament to the horrors of pre-modern dentistry. Imagine a painting by a 17th century Dutch or Flemish master, like Jan Steen or Adrian Brouwer. The setting is chaotic, often a marketplace or a rustic tavern. The tooth puller is the center of the scene, but he is rarely depicted as a heroic figure. More often, he's a caricature shifty-eyed charlatan in flamboyant clothes, or a brutish lout with more muscle than sense. He yanks on a tooth with a fearsome-looking tool, his face a mask of intense, almost comical concentration. But it's the patient you can't look away from. Their face is a symphony of agony. Their eyes are screwed shut. Their mouth is a silent scream. Their hands grip the arms of the chair with white-knuckled desperation. The artist captures the moment of peak suffering with almost sadistic glee, and surrounding them is a cast of characters gawking villagers, some laughing, some wincing in sympathy, a worried family member trying to offer comfort, often a child, picking the pocket of the distracted patient or the tooth puller himself, adding a touch of cynical humor to the scene. These paintings are loud, chaotic, and deeply human. One of the most famous and harrowing depictions is a painting from the early 16th century, attributed to a follower of Hieronymus Bosch. It shows a charlatan who has set up shop in a town square. He has extracted a stone of madness from a patient's head, a common quack procedure, but on his table, for all to see, is a collection of pulled teeth, a grim testament to his main trade. The faces in the crowd are a mixture of credulity and foolishness. The whole scene is a powerful critique of human gullibility in the face of suffering. Then there are the works of Theo de Rombouts, a 17th century painter from Antwerp who seemed to have a particular fascination with the subject. In his paintings, the scene is often illuminated by a single candle or lantern, casting dramatic, Caravaggio-esque shadows. The flickering light highlights the sweat on the patient's brow, the glint of the steel instrument, the dark red of the blood. The drama is palpable. You can almost hear the patient's groan and the sickening crack of the tooth. So why were these paintings so popular? Art historians are still debating this. One theory is that they served as moral allegories. The patient suffering from the toothache was a symbol of a person paying the price for a life of indulgence to many sweets, too much wine. The pain was a physical manifestation of a spiritual sickness. The paintings were a warning against gluttony and vice. Another theory is that they were simply a form of dark entertainment. In a time before television or movies, these dramatic, visceral scenes of human suffering were a source of fascination and a kind of morbid thrill. They were the disaster movies of their day. A more nuanced interpretation is that they were a reflection of a changing society. The rise of a more educated, urban middle class led to a demand for art that depicted the realities of everyday life, warts and all. These paintings were a way of acknowledging and, perhaps, exercising a common, shared fear. By painting the tooth puller, the artist and the viewer could gain a sense of mastery over him, turning a figure of terror into an object of study or even ridicule. The debate continues on the exact balance of these interpretations. And it wasn't just paintings. A fascinating and odd little niche was the production of votive offerings. If your prayer to Saint Apollonia had been successful, you might commission a small plaque or painting to hang in her chapel as a thank you. These often depicted you in your moment of agony, praying to the saint who then miraculously cured you. Some people would even offer small, carved ivory or wax models of the offending tooth. These chapels became galleries of pain and relief, covered in tiny testaments to suffering averted. As you finally arrive at the barber's shop, these images might flash through your mind. You are the person in those paintings. Your contorted face, your desperate hope for relief. It is a timeless expression. You are not just a patient, you are a subject, an archetype of pain. This realization doesn't lessen the fear, but it frames it. Your private agony is part of a public story, a story told in oil paint and shadow, a story of what it means to be fragile and human in a world that offers little mercy for an aching tooth. You stand before the barber-surgeon's shop for the second time. The striped pole seems to mock you, a candy-colored invitation to an ordeal. But something has shifted. You've exhausted every other option. The pain has beaten the fear into submission. This time, when you push the door open, you walk with the grim resolve of a soldier marching into a battle they know they cannot win, but must fight anyway. While you are having your personal reckoning in a European village, the ideas and beliefs of your culture are on the move. They are being packed up alongside salted cod, iron tools, and religious texts, and loaded onto creaking wooden ships. These ships are pointed west, across a vast, terrifying ocean that, only a few generations ago, your people didn't even know was there. The age of exploration and colonization is in full swing, and wherever the colonists go, they bring their baggage, including their superstitions. The tooth worm is about to become an immigrant. Imagine the scene on one of these ships. It's a cramped, filthy, miserable environment. The journey can take months. The food is rotten, the water is foul, and diseases like scurvy are rampant. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, has a devastating effect on the gums, causing them to swell, bleed, and eventually, for the teeth to loosen and fall out. For a sailor suffering from this, the pain would be immense. And what would they blame it on? Not on a dietary deficiency they couldn't possibly understand, but on something familiar, the toothworm. They would bring their folk remedies with them: a dried frog's leg for a poultice, a memorized charm to whisper into the wind. When these colonists, be they English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese, arrive in the Americas, they find all, and that is, to them, a new world. But it is a world already inhabited by millions of people with their own rich and complex civilizations, and their own medical traditions. The encounter between these two worlds is a story of collision, exchange, and often, tragedy. Did Native American cultures have a concept of the toothworm before the Europeans arrived? This is a fascinating and complex question for historians and anthropologists. The evidence is scattered and oft unfiltered through the biased lens of European observers. In some cases, it seems they did have similar beliefs. For example, some Aztec texts, recorded by Spanish friars after the conquest, describe a condition of worm-eaten teeth. They had their own sophisticated herbal remedies, using plants like the chili pepper for its numbing, analgesic properties. However, in many cases, the toothworm seems to have been a direct importation from Europe. The colonists brought the idea with them, and it slowly seeped into the local cultures, sometimes blending with pre-existing beliefs about spirits or witchcraft. A European settler suffering a toothache would turn to their familiar explanation, the worm, and their Native American neighbors, or the enslaved Africans forced to work on their plantations, would hear the stories and see the bizarre fumigation rituals. Over time, the myth took root in the new soil. We find evidence of this in the folk medicine that developed in colonial America. In the Appalachian Mountains, for example, a rich tradition of folk healing emerged, blending European, Native American, and African beliefs. And right there, in the heart of it all, is the toothworm. Folk healers in Appalachia, well into the 19th and even early 20th century, were still practicing charms and fumigations that were nearly identical to those used in medieval Germany or France. They would have the sufferer smoke a pipe filled with worm seed or recite a charm over a glass of water. A particularly weird piece of American dental folklore comes from the Pennsylvania Dutch community. They had a belief that a tooth could be cured by a SCH no Kebroch, a charm healer. The healer wouldn't even need to see the patient. The afflicted person would just send a messenger with their name and birth date. The healer would then write a specific, magical phrase on a piece of paper, and the pain would supposedly vanish. The contents of these magical notes were closely guarded secrets. The historical debate here revolves around the concept of cultural similarities, the blending of different belief systems. When we find a toothworm belief in a non-European culture after colonization, how much of it is a genuinely independent invention, and how much is an adaptation of the powerful, dominant culture's folklore? It's a sensitive topic, as it touches on issues of cultural exchange and colonial influence. Unraveling the true origin of a specific folk belief can be almost impossible. A puzzle of oral traditions and fragmented historical records. Back in the barber shop, you are, of course, oblivious to all of this. You have no idea that the belief cowering in your own mind is a successful cultural export, a bit of intellectual property that is colonizing minds across the globe. You only know that your own head has been colonized by a pain that will not leave. You sit in the chair. You grip the armrests. You look at the barber, his face grim and professional, and with a slight, trembling nod, you give him the signal to begin. The world outside, the great ships and the new continents, vanishes. Your entire existence narrows to this single, terrifying room. The ordeal in the barber-surgeon's chair is as brutal as you feared. When it's over, You were left trembling, bloody, and exhausted. But the malevolent, deep-seated ache is gone. In its place is the raw, keen pain of a wound. You have survived. You have won. The worm's house has been demolished, and you are free. For you, this is the end of the story. You will spend a few days recovering, eating soft foods, and then life will go on, -1 molar. But for the tooth worm itself, its long reign is about to face a new and unexpected threat. Not a brave bishop or a rival quack, but a quiet, unassuming Dutchman with an obsessive hobby. Let's leave you to your recovery and travel to the Netherlands in the latter half of the 17th century. We are in the city of Delft, a place of canals, prosperous merchants, and groundbreaking art. Here, in a small draper's shop, lives a man named Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. He is not a scholar. He is not a physician. He is a cloth merchant. His job is to inspect the quality of thread, and to do so, he needs to see it up close. He becomes obsessed with grinding lenses, developing a secret technique for creating small, powerful microscopes that are far superior to anything else in the world. He is a man driven by pure, unadulterated curiosity. He puts everything under his lenses: the sting of a bee, the scales of a fish, the head of a fly. And then one day, he decides to look at the plaque he has scraped from between his own teeth. He has never brushed them a day in his life. No one does. He mixes the plaque with a drop of clean rainwater and puts it under his lens. What he sees astonishes him. It astonishes the entire scientific world. In that single drop of dental plaque, he discovers a teeming, vibrant, miniature world. He sees tiny creatures, thousands of them, moving, swimming, and dashing about. He describes them in a letter to the Royal Society of London in 1683. His excitement palpable in his writing. I saw, with great wonder, he writes, that there were many very little living animalcules, very prettily moving. He describes different shapes, some that shot through the water like a pike, others that had a bending motion, and still others that spun around like a top. He has no idea what they are. He calls them animalcules, or little animals. He is the first human being in history to see bacteria. This is a monumental turning point. For the first time, there is a plausible, visible alternative to the tooth worm. Leeuwenhoek himself doesn't make the connection at first. He's just a brilliant observer, documenting what he sees. But his discovery plants a seed of doubt. The stuff that coats the teeth, the materia alba as it was called, was not just inert filth. It was alive. Could these tiny, swarming animalcules be the real cause of the decay and pain? Not a single, large worm. The discovery created a sensation, but it did not immediately kill the toothworm myth. Far from it. The idea of a single, gnawing worm was much easier to grasp than a swarm of invisible creatures. A worm is a villain you can picture. Animalcules are abstract, impersonal. For the average person suffering a toothache, the worm was still a much more satisfying explanation. A funny and revealing detail from Leeuwenhoek's letters shows how he inadvertently contributed to his own dental health. He was curious why his plaque contained so many living creatures. He decided to experiment. He drank a cup of very hot coffee and immediately scraped his teeth and looked again. He was delighted to find that he had killed almost all of the animalcules near the front of his mouth. He had, completely by accident, discovered the antimicrobial properties of heat. He also noted that the plaque from a person who drank wine or brandy regularly had far fewer living creatures, correctly deciding that the alcohol was killing them. The academic controversy that followed Leeuwenhoek's discovery wasn't about whether the animalcules existed. His observations were confirmed by others like Robert Hooke. The debate was about what they were and what they did. The prevailing theory at the time was spontaneous generation. The idea that living creatures could arise from non-living matter like maggots from meat. Many scientists believed Leeuwenhoek's animalcules were simply a byproduct of the decay, not the cause of it. They thought the tooth rotted first, and then the animalcules spontaneously generated in the rot. It would take another 200 years. And the work of Louis Pasteur, to definitively prove that germs cause disease. So, while Lewin Woke opened a new door, the world wasn't quite ready to walk through it. The toothworm and the animalcules would coexist uneasily for the next century and a half, for doctors and scientists. The animalcules were a fascinating new puzzle, but for the vast majority of people, the worm remained the true enemy. The old story was just too good to die. But its foundations had been shaken. A crack had appeared in the myth, and a new light, the light of microscopy, was beginning to shine through. The worm's days were numbered, even if no one knew it yet. Lewin Woke's discovery of animalcules was a scientific earthquake, but its aftershocks took a long time to reach the general public. While a few learned men in London and Amsterdam were marveling at the microscopic world, you and everyone you know are still living in the age of the worm. The barber-surgeon is still the only game in town, but change is coming, not just from the laboratory, but from within the ranks of the surgeons themselves. The worm is about to meet its first great public technique. Let's travel forward to the early 18th century, to Paris, the glittering center of European culture and science. The city is a hub of enlightenment thinking, a place where reason and scientific inquiry are beginning to challenge old traditions and superstitions. It is here that we meet a man who will almost single-handedly drag dentistry out of the marketplace and into the realm of professional medicine. His name is Pierre Fauchard. Fauchard was not born into a wealthy, educated family. He began his career, like many others, as a surgeon in the French Navy. This was a brutal but practical training ground. He saw firsthand the devastating effects of scurvy and other diseases on the teeth and gums of sailors. He learned the practical skills of extraction and treatment in the most challenging of environments. But unlike most of his colleagues, Fauchard was not just a craftsman, he was a scientist at heart. He was a meticulous observer, a brilliant innovator, and a man with a mission. After leaving the Navy, he set up a practice in Paris, but he wasn't just a tooth puller. He called himself a surgery and dentist, a surgical dentist, a title he invented to distinguish himself from the charlatans and the common barbers. He was determined to establish dentistry as a legitimate, specialized field of surgery, based on science and a deep understanding of oral anatomy. In 1728, after years of painstaking work, he published a massive, two-volume book called Le Surgery and Dentist, Trait des Dents, the Surgical Dentist, or Treatise on the Teeth. This was not just a book, it was a revolution. It was the first truly comprehensive textbook of dentistry ever written. It covered everything: oral anatomy, surgical techniques, restorative procedures, and even orthodontics. He described methods for filling cavities using tin, lead, or gold, building dental prosthetics, and correcting crooked teeth with wires and braces. He was centuries ahead of his time. And in this landmark book, Fauchard took direct aim at the most cherished belief in his field, the toothworm. He devoted an entire chapter to systematically, patiently, and mercilessly demolishing the myth. He begins by acknowledging the belief is ancient and widespread. He doesn't mock his patients for believing it, he understands their fear. But then, with the cool, relentless logic of an Enlightenment thinker, he picks it apart, piece by piece. He challenges the eyewitness accounts of the fumigation trick. He writes, however dexterous one may be, it is difficult to prevent the person from perceiving the trick. He explains the hen by seed delusion in clear, simple terms, revealing it for the fraud that it is. He then goes after the charlatans who claim to pull living worms from teeth. He explains the sleight of hand with the hidden maggots or loose strings. He calls them out as frauds who abuse the credulity of the simple and ignorant. But his most powerful argument is a scientific one. He writes that in his many years of practice, dissecting decayed teeth and examining them with the best microscopes available, he has never, not once, seen a worm. I can certify, he declares, that I have never seen any worm or the least vestige of a worm. He acknowledges Lewin Woke's animalcules, but, like many of his time, he concludes they are a result of decay, not the cause. The true cause, he argued, was a humoral disorder. a subtle imbalance in the body's fluids that led the tooth to corrode from within. He wasn't entirely right, but he was a giant leap closer to the truth. By definitively ruling out the worm, he cleared the way for future scientists to find the real culprit. Therefore, Chard's book was a sensation. It was translated into German and other languages and became the foundational text for a new generation of dentists who wanted to practice scientifically. He is rightly called the father of modern dentistry. However, the historical debate surrounding F.A.U. Chard is about his impact. How quickly did his scientific, rational approach trickle down to the average person while his book was celebrated in Paris? The tooth puller in a small village in the English countryside or a fumigator in the mountains of Italy would have never heard of him. The toothworm myth was like a deeply rooted, stubborn weed. F.A.U. Chard had chopped off its head, but the roots were still alive and well in the soil of popular culture. The belief was too old, too widespread, and too psychologically satisfying to be killed by a single book, no matter how brilliant. So even as F.A.U. Chard is laying the groundwork for the modern, scientific dentistry we know today, the world for most people remains unchanged. The charlatan with his henbane seeds and the barber with his pelican are still doing a brisk business. The war against the toothworm would have to be fought on two fronts: the scientific front, in the libraries and clinics of men like F.A.U. Chard, and the cultural front, in the minds of ordinary people still steeped in centuries of folklore. And that second battle would prove to be much, much longer. Let's return to your story. The extraction is over. The bloody, mangled tooth, the worm's house, is gone. The barber-surgeon has done his brutal work. You are now in the recovery phase. Your jaw a landscape of dull, aching relief. But, in the days that follow, a new anxiety begins to creep in. The gaping hole in your gum is a constant, unpleasant reminder of the ordeal. Chewing is difficult, and there is the empty space. A void your tongue constantly explores. You have solved the immediate problem of the pain, but you are left with a permanent disability. Now let's imagine a slightly different reality. Let's say F.A.U. Chard's revolution has started to gain a little traction. It's the late 18th century, and the world is changing. The ideas of science and progress are in the air. In a larger town or a city, you might now have a choice. The old world and the new world of dentistry exist side by side. You are faced with a duel of two healers. On one side of the town square is the traditionalist, the barber-surgeon, or the traveling tooth puller. His methods are the ones we know well. He is cheap, first, and his solution is always the same: extraction. He speaks the familiar language of the worm. He offers a definitive, if brutal, end to the problem. He is trusted by the community because he is a known quantity. His father was a tooth puller, and his father before him. He represents tradition. On the other side of town, perhaps in a more respectable street, a new kind of practitioner has set up shop. He is one of F.A.U. Chard's disciples. He calls himself a dentist or an operator for the teeth. His office is not a chaotic corner of a barbershop. It's a clean, quiet room, perhaps with a proper chair designed for the patient's comfort. He doesn't advertise with a painted banner of a snarling worm. He may have a simple, elegant sign with his name and qualifications. He represents progress. When your tooth begins to ache, you now have a dilemma. Who do you trust? You visit the traditionalist first. He takes a quick, cursory look in your mouth. Aye aye, it's the worm, he says with confidence. It's dug deep, has to come out. A quick pull, a bit of bleeding, and you'll be right as rain by tomorrow. His fee is small. The procedure will be over in minutes. Then, full of apprehension, you visit the new dentist. The experience is entirely different. He doesn't talk about worms. He uses a small mirror on a long handle to get a proper look at the tooth. He might even use a dental probe, a thin metal instrument, to gently explore the cavity. He talks to you in a calm, scientific-sounding language. He speaks of caries and decay. He explains that the tooth has been destroyed by a corrosive agent, not a parasite. And then he offers you a radical, almost unbelievable proposition. He doesn't want to pull the tooth, he wants to save it. He tells you he can carefully remove the decayed part of the tooth using tiny, specialized chisels and files. Then, he can fill the hole with a plug of lead or gold leaf, protecting the tooth from further damage. He explains that this will be a long, painstaking process. It will require several visits. It will be uncomfortable, and it will be expensive, very expensive. The materials are costly, and his time is valuable. You are now at a crossroads, a moment that perfectly encapsulates the shift from pre-modern to modern medicine. Who do you choose? The traditionalist offers a fast, cheap, and familiar solution that results in the loss of the tooth. The modernist offers a slow, expensive, and strange procedure that promises to save it. This was a very real dilemma for people in the 18th and early 19th centuries. The new dentistry was viewed with a great deal of suspicion. For many, the idea of drilling and filling a tooth seemed like a bizarre and unnecessary torture. Pulling it was simple and final. Why complicate things? The new dentists were often seen as a feat. Overeducated dandies who charged outrageous fees for fiddly, pointless work. A curious detail from this era is the emergence of dental keys. This tool, which replaced the pelican as the instrument of choice for extraction, looked like a large, old-fashioned door key. The end of the shaft was a claw that was placed over the tooth, and the cross handle was used to turn it, breaking the tooth from its socket with a sharp twist. While slightly more controlled than the pelican, it was still a brutal instrument that often broke the tooth or the jaw. The key became the symbol of the old way of thinking. If a tooth is a problem, the solution is to unlock it from the head. The new dentists, with their delicate files and gold foil, were proposing a completely different philosophy. The academic debate here focuses on the socio-economics of this transition. Who had access to this new kind of dentistry for a long time? It was exclusively the domain of the wealthy. The urban elite, the rising merchant class, could afford to pay for the time and expensive materials required for restorative work. For the vast majority of the population, farmers, laborers, the urban poor, extraction remained the only viable option for centuries. This created a dental divide, where the rich could preserve their teeth, while the poor were destined to become toothless. This gap between the ideal of scientific dentistry and the reality of everyday practice was enormous and persistent. So what do? Do you trust the familiar brutality of the key, or the strange promise of the filling? Do you sacrifice the tooth to save money, or sacrifice the money to save the tooth? Your decision isn't just about a single molar. It's a vote of confidence, a vote for the past, or a vote for the future. Let's say you make the progressive choice. You drain your savings, put your faith in science, and commit to the long, uncomfortable process of having your tooth saved by the newfangled dentist. You endure the scraping, the filing, and the painstaking packing of the filling. The dentist is skilled, and he succeeds. The tooth is saved, but the experience was, to put it mildly, unpleasant. The memory of the sounds, the sensations, and the prolonged discomfort lingers. Dentistry might be becoming more scientific, but it has not yet become painless. This is the next great hurdle. For dentistry to be truly accepted by the masses, it needs to solve the problem of pain. The fear of the procedure was almost as big a barrier as the cost, and the solution, when it came, would arrive not from a dentist's office, but from the raucous, almost carnival-like world of public scientific demonstrations. Let's travel to the United States in the 1840s. It's an era of invention, optimism, and a peculiar form of public entertainment, the science lecture. Traveling professors and chemists would tour the country, dazzling audiences with demonstrations of the latest scientific wonders, like electricity and chemistry. One of the most popular demonstrations involved a newly synthesized gas, nitrous oxide. When inhaled, nitrous oxide had a remarkable effect. It made people disinhibited, euphoric, and prone to fits of uncontrollable laughter. The demonstrations were hilarious spectacles. Volunteers from the audience would inhale the gas from a bag and then stumble around the stage, singing, declaiming poetry, and generally making fools of themselves, to the roaring delight of the crowd. The gas quickly earned a nickname Laughing Gas. In 1844, a young dentist from Hartford, Connecticut, named Horace Wells, attended one of these laughing gas demonstrations. He watched the spectacle with professional interest. He saw one of the volunteers, a local man named Samuel Cooley, inhale the gas and then, while stumbling around in a euphoric haze, gash his leg badly on a wooden bench. Wells watched, fascinated, as Cooley continued his antics, seemingly oblivious to the deep, bleeding wound on his shin. It was only when the effects of the gas wore off that Cooley noticed his injury, and he swore he hadn't felt a thing when it happened. A light bulb went on in Horace Wells's head. He was a sensitive and compassionate man who was deeply troubled by the pain he inflicted on his patients. He hated being a source of agony. In that moment, watching the blissfully unaware Cooley, he saw a potential solution. If this gas could prevent the pain of a deep gash, could it prevent the pain of a tooth extraction? The very next day, Wells decided to experiment on himself. This was a common practice for pioneering doctors and scientists of the era, a kind of reckless self-sacrifice in the name of progress. He asked the man who had run the demonstration, Gardner Quincy Colton, to bring a bag of nitrous oxide to his dental office. He also asked a fellow dentist, John Riggs, to be there. Wells sat in his own dental chair, inhaled the gas until he was insensible, and then had Riggs pull out one of his own aching wisdom teeth. As the effects of the gas wore off, Wells awoke. His first words, according to those in the room, were, "I knew error in tooth pulling." He hadn't felt a thing. He described it as feeling like the prick of a pin. He was ecstatic. He believed he had found the holy grail, a way to conquer surgical pain. Wells immediately began using nitrous oxide on his patients, with great success, but he wanted to share his discovery with the world. In 1845, he arranged to give a public demonstration at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, in front of an audience of surgeons and medical students. This should have been his moment of triumph. Instead, it was a disaster. The patient was a young man who needed a tooth pulled. Wells administered the gas, but he was nervous. He may have removed the bag too soon, or the patient may have been a particularly difficult case. As the surgeon began the extraction, the patient moaned and thrashed in the chair. He wasn't in agony, he later admitted. But he was not completely silent and still. The audience of skeptical, hard-bitten surgeons, accustomed to patients screaming in agony, was not impressed. They hissed and booed, declaring the demonstration a failure. Someone shouted, "Humbug!" Humiliated, Wells fled the hole. His reputation was ruined. A little-known and tragic footnote to this story is the role of another substance ether. A former student and colleague of Wells, a man named William T.G. Morton, was in the audience that day. Morton, seeing Wells's public failure, decided to find a more reliable anesthetic. He began experimenting with sulfuric ether, another chemical known to have intoxicating properties. In 1846, in that very same operating theater at Massachusetts General, Morton gave a successful demonstration of ether as a surgical anesthetic. It was a triumph, and Morton was hailed as the discoverer of anesthesia, a claim he fought for his entire life. The historical debate over who truly discovered anesthesia, Wells with nitrous oxide, or Morton with ether, or another doctor named Crawford Long who had used ether in Georgia even earlier but hadn't publicized it, is one of the most bitter and tragic controversies in medical history. It led to lawsuits, public feuds, and ruined lives. Horace Wells, despondent over his public humiliation and his failure to be recognized, became addicted to chloroform, another early anesthetic, and tragically took his own life. But despite the personal tragedies, the genie was out of the bottle. Painless surgery was now a reality. For dentistry, this was the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. Anesthesia took the terror out of the dentist's chair. It transformed the practice from a feared ordeal into a manageable procedure. The duel between the old tooth puller and the new dentist was finally over. With the weapon of anesthesia on their side, the modern dentists had won. With the victory of scientific dentistry and the conquest of pain by anesthesia. You would think our story is over. The tooth worm, that ancient, shadowy villain, should have been relegated to the dusty pages of history books, a forgotten superstition. FAU Child had debunked it. Wells and Morton had made it irrelevant. The case should have been closed. But beliefs are stubborn things, especially beliefs that have been woven into the fabric of a culture for thousands of years. The tooth worm was not going to give up its territory so easily, while the educated elites in Paris, London, and Boston were embracing the new world of painless, scientific dentistry. The worm simply packed its bags and retreated to its old strongholds, the rural, the isolated, and the traditional communities of the world. The legend went underground. Let's travel forward again, to the late 19th and even the early 20th century. This is a world of steam trains, telegraphs, and electric lights. Modernity is marching on. But if you were to travel into the deep countryside, the remote valleys of the Alps, the peat bogs of Ireland, the hollows of Appalachia, or the small farming villages of Germany, you would find the tooth worm alive and well. Here, the local blacksmith might still be the one you go to for a toothache, using a terrifying but effective tool called a nail passer, which was essentially a punch in the hammer, and the local wise woman, the heir to a Laura's tradition, would still be whispering charms and brewing strange concoctions to drive out the worm. The newfangled dentists in the far-off cities were viewed with suspicion. They were expensive. They were strangers. And their talk of germs and caries was abstract and unsettling. The worm was an explanation that still made a visceral kind of sense. We know this from an incredible source, the work of folklorists and anthropologists who, at the turn of the 20th century, made a concerted effort to record these dying traditions before they vanished completely. They traveled to these remote areas with notebooks and, later, wax cylinder recorders, and they interviewed the old-timers. They collected stories, songs, and folk remedies. And in this vast repository of oral history, the tooth worm appears again and again. In Germany, folklorists recorded dozens of charms against the sandworm. One common ritual involved the sufferer going to a pear tree at sunrise, bowing 3 times, and saying, "Pear tree, I complain to thee, 3 worms my teeth do harry." The idea was to transfer the worms to the tree. In rural England, people still held to the belief that carrying a tooth from a dead horse in your pocket would protect you from the worm. One of the most surprising and well-documented survivals of the worm belief was the fumigation ritual. An article in a German dental journal from as late as 1909 describes a worm driver who was still actively practicing in a rural community. He used the classic henbane seed trick, drawing crowds and convincing sufferers that he was extracting worms from their mouths. The author of the article, a modern dentist, wrote with a tone of exasperated disbelief that such medieval superstition could still exist in the age of the automobile. A particularly bizarre and funny piece of trivia from this period comes from a British folklore survey in the 1922. An elderly man from Somerset swore that the only cure for a toothache was to find a graveyard, locate a skull, and pull one of its teeth. You were then supposed to put the skulls teeth into your own pocket. The logic was that the spirit of the dead person's toothache would scare away your own. This is sympathetic magic at its most macabre. The academic debate here is a fascinating one about the nature of belief itself. Why did the toothworm myth persist for so long? Even in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary, some historians argue it was a matter of access and economics. Scientific dentistry was simply unavailable or unaffordable for many people, so they clung to the traditions they had. Others argue it was a matter of culture and psychology. The scientific explanation that your own body was failing, that you had a decay, can feel like a personal failing. The worm myth, as we've seen, externalizes the problem. You are the victim of an outside invader. It's a more comforting, if terrifying, narrative. It's not your fault, it's the worm's. So for centuries after its scientific death, the worm lived on as a ghost, a folk memory haunting the fringes of the modern world. It became a creature of two realms. In the city, it was a joke, a symbol of a primitive, ignorant past. But in the countryside, it was still a very real and present danger. The final eradication of the tooth worm wouldn't be accomplished by a dentist, but by something far more powerful: compulsory education, mass media, and the slow, relentless creep of a standardized, scientific worldview into every corner of society. The worm didn't die in a blaze of glory, it just slowly faded away, like an old photograph left out in the sun. The tooth worm has finally, almost, vanished from the world. The ghost has been busted. We have followed its story from the clay tablets of Sumer to the folklore archives of the 20th century. We've seen it outlast empires and survive scientific revolutions. But before we close the book on this tenacious little creature, it seems only fair to give the stage to its replacement. We've spent all this time talking about the wrong culprit. So, who is the real villain of this story? What is actually happening in your mouth when you get a cavity? Let's do something we haven't been able to do for this entire journey. Let's zoom in, way in, past the enamel, past the dentin, into the microscopic world that Luan Woke first glimpsed. The explanation is elegant, and in its own way, just as dramatic as the myth of the worm. The story begins, as we suspected way back in section 2, with sugar. But sugar itself isn't the direct enemy. Think of it more as an arms dealer. It provides the weapons and supplies for the real army of destruction. Your mouth, right now, is a bustling metropolis. It is home to billions of bacteria, a complex ecosystem of hundreds of different species. Most of them are harmless, or even helpful. They are just living their lives. But a few of them, particularly a species with the wonderfully villainous sounding name Streptococcus mutans, have a special talent. They are exceptionally good at eating sugar. When you eat something sweet, that honey cake, that lump of sugar, or in the modern world, a piece of candy or a soda, these bacteria have a feast. They consume the sugar and, as a waste product of their metabolic process, they produce acid, specifically lactic acid. This is the real weapon. For a little while after your sugary snack, your saliva, which is normally neutral or slightly alkaline, becomes a mild acid bath, and this acid is what attacks your teeth. Your tooth enamel is the hardest substance in your body. It's a crystalline structure made mostly of a mineral called hydrocamatous D. It's incredibly tough, but it has an Achilles heel: it dissolves in acid. The first stage of this attack is called demineralization. The acid begins to leach out the calcium and phosphate minerals from the enamel, weakening its structure. It's like acid rain slowly eating away at a marble statue. At this early stage, the damage is reversible. Your saliva is a natural superhero. It works to neutralize the acid, and it contains calcium and phosphate ions that it can use to remineralize or rebuild the enamel. It's a constant, microscopic war being waged on the surface of your teeth, a tug of war between demineralization by acid and remineralization by saliva. But if the acid attacks are too frequent, if you're constantly sipping on a sugary drink or snacking on sweets throughout the day, your saliva can't keep up. The demineralization wins the war. The enamel gets weaker and weaker until, finally, it breaks. A microscopic hole forms. This is the burrow hole that Ilara thought was the worm's front door. It's the point of no return. A cavity is born. Once that hole is there, the bacteria can move in. They set up a protected little colony inside the breach, a fortress where saliva can't easily wash them away. No, safe inside your tooth, they continue their work, feasting on any sugar that comes their way and producing more acid. The cavity gets deeper, eating its way through the enamel and into the softer layer beneath, called the dentin. Dentin is more porous than enamel, filled with tiny tubules that lead directly to the center of the tooth, where the pulp is. The pulp is the tooth's living core, a soft tissue containing nerves and blood vessels. This is the blood and marrow the Sumerian worm so desperately craved. As the decay approaches the pulp, you start to feel the first signs of trouble: sensitivity to hot or cold. The nerve is starting to get irritated. When the decay finally reaches the pulp, the bacteria invade, causing inflammation and infection. This is the toothache. This is the gnawing pain. It's not a worm, it's your own immune system fighting a bacterial invasion in a tiny, enclosed space. The pressure builds, presses on the nerve, and the result is agony. One of the interesting academic debates in modern dentistry isn't about if this process happens, but about the nuances of it. For example, what is the exact role of a person's individual oral microbiome? Why are some people naturally more prone to cavities than others? Even with similar diets, the answers are complex, involving genetics, the specific strains of bacteria they host, the composition of their saliva, and even the physical shape of their teeth. It's a field of ongoing and fascinating research. A cool, slightly gross piece of trivia: the substance Lowen-Wolksaw, the pleca biofilm, is not just a random connection of bacteria. It's a highly organized, collaborative community. The bacteria build a sticky matrix, a kind of bacterial city, that helps them adhere to the tooth and protects them from being washed away. It's a marvel of microbial engineering. So, the real story is a chemical one. It's a story of sugar, bacteria, and acid. It lacks the single, personified villain of the toothworm myth. But it has its own drama. It's a story of a silent, invisible siege, the battle of minerals and microbes, that plays out on a microscopic scale every single day. Understanding this doesn't make it any less painful, but it gives us the power to prevent it. The worm required an exorcist. The bacteria just require a toothbrush. Let's go back one last time. Back to you. Not the you who has already endured the barbarous pelican, but the you from the very beginning of our story, sitting on that rough-hewn stiletto dusk, feeling that first, faint, distant throb, the starting point of this whole journey. But this time, you have a new and powerful talisman. You have knowledge. You have been a silent passenger on a journey through thousands of years of pain, superstition, and discovery. You have seen the origins of the worm on a Sumerian clay tablet. You have tasted the foulness of a dead mouse poultice. You have inhaled the hallucinogenic smoke of henbane and seen the worms fall into the bowl. You have cowered in the chair of the barber-surgeon and stood beside Queen Elizabeth as she trembled in fear. You have visited the enlightened hospitals of Cordoba, peered through Leeuwenhoek's microscope, and read over the shoulder of Pierre Fauchard as he declared war on the myth. You have sat in on Horace Welles' disastrous but world-changing demonstration. You know the truth. So now, when you feel that throb, your mind doesn't jump to a demonic parasite. You don't think, a worm is gnawing at my root. You think, the acid has breached the enamel. The diagnosis changes everything. The fear is still there, pain is pain, but it's a different kind of fear. It's not the primal terror of being infested by a malevolent entity. It's the rational anxiety of a mechanical problem. It's the kind of fear you feel when you hear a strange clanking sound in the axle of your cart. It's a problem to be solved, not a demon to be exorcised. When your partner suggests you go see Elara the wise woman, you hesitate. You respect Elara. Her knowledge of herbs for fevers and wounds is invaluable. But you know in your heart that her chants and her mouse based are aimed at an enemy that doesn't exist. You thank your partner for the suggestion, but you know that path leads only to false hope and wasted time. The next day, as the pain sharpens, you hear the distant shouting of a traveling tooth drawer in the marketplace. You hear him promising to smoke the worm out. You see the crowd gathering. The old you, the desperate you, might have been drawn in by the spectacle, by the promise of a magical cure, but the new you just shakes your head and walks away. You know it's a trick. You are immune to the charlatan spell because you know how the magic works. You are now in a strange and lonely position. You are a person out of time, armed with an understanding that no one around you shares. You are living in the 16th century, but you are thinking with a 21st century mind. So what do? You know the real problem is decay, and that if it's not stopped, it will lead to infection and possibly death. You also know that the only person in your world equipped to deal with the ultimate consequence of this problem is the barber-surgeon. His methods are brutal, his understanding of the cause is wrong, but his final solution extraction is, in a grim way, effective. It removes the source of the infection. So you make a choice. A cold, calculated, modern choice. Even though you live in a pre-modern world, you decide to bypass all the intermediate steps. You will not waste time on magic or religion. You will not allow the infection to get worse, to lead to a swollen jaw and a life-threatening fever. You will treat this not as a spiritual crisis, but as a pragmatic medical problem. You walk to the barber-surgeon's shop, but you don't go in terror. You go with resignation. You are not a victim of a worm going to an executioner. You are a patient with a serious condition, seeking the only available treatment, however crude. You sit in the chair. The barber says, "The worm's dug in deep." You just nod. You don't argue. You don't try to explain the complex chemistry of Streptococcus mutans on lactic acid. What would be the point? He has the tool, and you need the procedure. The historical debate here is a philosophical one. Can a person truly step outside their time? Is it possible to apply modern, rational thought in a world that is not structured to support it, or would the overwhelming cultural pressure, the consensus of everyone you know and trust, eventually force you back into the old ways of thinking? Historians often talk about the mentality of an era, the collective mindset, the unstated assumptions that govern how people perceive the world. To act against the mental mentality of your own time requires a level of intellectual and emotional fortitude that is almost superhuman. But you have it. You have the benefit of our journey. As the barber approaches with the pelican, or perhaps the key, you don't pray to Saint Apollonia to smite the worm. You take a deep breath, grip the arms of the chair, and focus on a single, scientific thought. This is a necessary surgical intervention to remove a source of bacterial infection. It is a terrible mantra, but it is your shield. It is the sterile, cold comfort of science in a world of hot, messy superstition. The procedure is just as agonizing as it was the first time, but your experience of it is profoundly different. You have made a decision. You have taken control of your own fate. Using the limited, brutal tools at your disposal, but guided by a knowledge that is centuries ahead of its time. You have navigated the insane history of the toothworm and emerged, bloody and bruised, but with your mind, at least, intact. The pain recedes, the bleeding stops. The sharp rag of the empty socket slowly fades into a dull throb, and then into nothing more than a memory. Your journey is over. You have survived. Now, let's pull the camera back. Let's leave your small village, your historical timeline, and find ourselves in a quiet, modern space. Imagine you are walking through the halls of a vast museum. But this isn't a museum of fine art or grand military victories. It's a museum of pain, the museum of dental history. You walk into the first hall, dimly lit, the air still and quiet. On a pedestal, under a soft spotlight, is a small, clay tablet. It's covered in the delicate, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform. A small plaque beside it reads incantation against the tooth worm. Sumer, c. 20 to 50 BCE. You look at the ancient script, and you can almost hear the weeping worm bargaining with the gods. Feel the desperation of the priest trying to save his patient with a story. You move to the next room. Glass cases line the walls, filled with the artifacts of folk magic. Here is a small, desiccated frog, like the one Pliny the Elder wrote about. Here is a collection of amulets, strange stones and bits of bone once worn to ward off evil. In one case, there's a display of dried herbs, henbane, nightshade, mandrake. The plaque explains their dual role as both anesthetic and poison. The thin line the ancient healers wore. You see a recreation of Alora's hut, with its hanging herbs and smoky fire. And you remember the foul taste of the mouse paste poultice. The next hall is dedicated to the tools. This is the one that makes everyone uncomfortable. The instruments are laid out on beds of dark velvet. They're called iron forms, looking sinister even in the soft gallery lighting. You see a row of dental pelicans. They're claw-like hooks looking vicious and crude. You see the evolution of the dental key. Its design becoming slightly more refined over the centuries, but no less brutal. You can't help but touch your own jaw. A fun to make echoing across time. Beside them are the paintings, the chaotic, vibrant, agonizing scenes by the Dutch masters. The face of the screaming patient is repeated again and again, a chorus of silent suffering. Then, you turn a corner, and the entire mood of the museum shifts. The lighting is brighter, the exhibits more clinical. You are entering the age of science. You see a replica of Leeuwenhoek's tiny, bead-like microscope. A projection on the wall shows his animal cules swimming and darting. A universe in a drop of water. Nearby, a first edition of Pierre Feu Chancellor surgery and dentist lies open. Its elegant script and detailed anatomical drawings are stark contrast to the crude tools in the previous room. You see his forceful, logical takedown of the worm myth and feel the fresh air of the Enlightenment blowing through the dusty corridors of superstition. The final exhibit in the main hall is dedicated to the conquest of pain. There's a recreation of a laughing gas party, complete with goofy-looking mannequins, and in a solemn, central display, you see the faces of Horace Wells and William Morton. The exhibit tells the story of their discovery, their rivalry, and the tragic price of their ambition. You see early anesthesia masks, glass bottles of ether and chloroform, and you feel a profound sense of gratitude that is almost overwhelming. You have walked through for thorough years of fear and ingenuity. What you realize, standing here at the end, is that the story of the toothworm isn't just a quirky piece of medical history. It's the story of the human mind itself. It's the story of our desperate need to find explanations for our suffering, to give our pain a name and a face. Even if that face is a monstrous, imaginary worm. It's a story of how we build narratives to make sense of a chaotic and often painful world. The academic debate that encompasses this entire museum is a simple one: progress or continuity. Do you look at this story and see a triumphant, linear march of progress, from superstitious darkness into scientific light, or do you see a story of continuity, where the fundamental human fears and desires, the fear of pain, the desire for a cure, the need for a comforting story, remain the same, merely changing their clothes with the fashion of the times? Or are modern anxieties about antibiotic-resistant superbugs really so different from the ancient fear of a demonic worm? It's a question with no easy answer. You leave the main exhibits and find yourself in a bright, modern wing. Here are displays of electric drills, X-ray machines, and modern composite resins. It's clean, sterile, and almost boring in its efficiency. It lacks the dramatic horror of the past, and you have never been more grateful for boring. Your long, strange journey through the history of a toothache has ended. You walk out of the museum's doors, blinking in the bright, modern sunlight, your teeth safely in your head, and the phantom worm finally, truly, laid to rest. And so, the journey through the long night of the toothworm comes to a close. The story, which began with a single, tiny throb, has spiraled through time and across continents. A testament to one of the most persistent and strangely compelling myths in human history. It's a reminder that the path to the comfortable, sterile world of modern medicine was not a straight line, but a meandering, often terrifying, and sometimes ridiculous road, paved with good intentions, bad ideas, and a whole lot of pain. It's a story that should make us all profoundly grateful for the simple, adoring, beautiful magic of a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. Now, as the echoes of that story fade, allow your own mind to grow quiet. Let the images of the past dissolve like sugar and water. The long and winding tale is done. There are no more barbers to fear, no more foul potions to drink, There is only the stillness of your room, the gentle weight of your blanket, and the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The journey is over. It is time to rest. The end of the article. Good night.